Hello everyone, this is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was banished and rebuilt the Roman Empire? Naruto times Hinata times Ino times Temari, Part 2. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. Konohamaru stood there, unsure of what to do in the face of his mentor's battle stance. What did I say? Always press attack. Hearing his instructions again, this time the academy student charged at his idol, hands raised above his head and his sword leaning back towards the ground due to gravity. When he got within striking distance, he began to pull the blade forward, but was forced to jump to the side in order to avoid the jab Naruto sent at his face. Unfortunately, the weight of the Pugio threw off his center of gravity, and Konohamaru was sent tumbling onto his backside. This left him unprepared for the foot that came down at him, leaving Konohamaru just enough time to throw up his arms in an X block and wind up on his back. When the boy opened his eyes, he was met with the tip of Naruto's gladius, and cobalt eyes gleaming with disappointment. That was awful. Konohamaru, don't ever charge at your opponent like that. As you just experienced, it leaves you extremely vulnerable, and just as bad, leaves you off balance. Your next mistake. Don't ever let go of your weapon, because if you do, you're dead. Hearing these harsh words from his idol made the young academy student lower his head in shame. I'm sorry, boss, I wasn't thinking. At this, he turned his eyes up at his mentor and pleaded, Please, don't make me go home. I'll get it, I promise, just give me another chance. Seeing his student so dedicated to learning, and making Naruto proud, made the blonde reconsider his earlier thought of actually sending the kid home. Alright, you get one more chance to prove that you're serious about this. If you do well, then your training will continue. If not, then don't ever broach the subject with me again. Konohamaru's eyes filled with hope, and then steeled in determination at his mentor's final words. I can't afford to mess up again. Getting back on his feet, the boy picked the Pugio up and returned to his starting position. This time, instead of rushing in, Konohamaru entered into the same stance he'd seen his teacher in moments before. However, when he went to pull his blade parallel to his face, he could feel his arms shake underneath the unusual weight, but he forced himself to hold firm and not look weak in front of Naruto. So there the two stood, staring each other down and waiting to see who'd make the first move. Again, Konohamaru struck first, but this time far less recklessly. He brought his sword down and broke into a run. When he felt close enough, he performed a ground roll, and when he returned to his feet, swung out at Naruto's right leg. But Naruto, acting on reflex, lifted his leg and avoided the attack, and then once again swung out with his leg and this time managed to connect with the boy's cheek. Konohamaru was sent rolling from the kick, but managed to get a hand flat on the ground, and pushed himself into an uneasy kneeling position. However, he didn't get to rebalance himself as his mentor was already upon him, sword coming down in a horizontal slash. Konohamaru was the one to act on instinct this time, as raised the Pugio up and tried to block. Tried, because the blade was swiftly knocked from his hand, before he was met with a viscous back fist that sprawled him out on the grass. Quickly setting aside the throbbing pain in his jaw, Konohamaru sat up on his knees, and searched for his weapon. When he didn't see it, he looked to his teacher. Naruto stood now with his gladius returned to its sheath and his sidearm clutched at his side in a reverse grip. He also wore a small smile on his face aimed, directly, at Konohamaru. You did better. When I was harsh before, you must understand, while I don't expect you to be a match for a member of the Anbu on your first practice, I still expect a degree of focus and level-headedness that you did not show the first round. Konohamaru visibly winced at the mention of his first attempt. But, the second time around I noticed you adopted my defensive stance, as well as thought out your plan of attack before engaging me. Hearing the praise of his mentor and role model, the academy student's face split into an ear-to-ear smile, before swiftly returning to normal, and Konohamaru's hand reaching up at his newly bruised face. Tears started to well in his eyes, but the boy forced them back so as to again avoid looking weak in front of Naruto. Konohamaru's actions did not go unnoticed. Naruto saw that the boy had tried multiple times during the course of their training session to keep up a strong and devoted front, something the blonde felt would come in handy, and as something he could use to help the boy become stronger. For now though, hey, Konohamaru, how about you and I go and get something to eat? As a reward for doing so well during our second go-around, you can choose where we eat. Konohamaru, although excited at the prospect of eating at his favorite restaurant, decided that he'd rather have a different reward. As much as that would rock, boss, could I maybe use my reward to have us keep training? The boy's request shocked Naruto at first, but then he realized that he'd just found a very useful asset. Well, if that's what you want, sure. Like I said, I'm new to this as well, and I need all the practice I can get right now, so it'll be good to at least get a feel for handling my blade. This brought on a question that Konohamaru had kept in the back of his mind. Hey boss, what kind of sword is that? I don't think I've seen, or learned about it. Well, this is called a gladius, and you've never seen one because they aren't used anymore. And you haven't learned about them because the academy doesn't cover any history of before the Sage of Six Paths. It's sad really, so much great history swept aside because it doesn't involve flashy jutsu or funny-looking eyes. Hearing his teacher speak that way about jutsu was mind-boggling for the young Sarutobi, due mostly in part to the fact that the very first jutsu Konohamaru ever perfected was one taught to him by the blonde standing before him. Boss, why are you being so down about jutsus when you're the one who taught me the first one I've ever got right? Naruto balked. He'd forgotten about that jutsu. Well, no time like the present to fix that little problem. Konohamaru, I need to ask you to do something for me, okay? The kid nodded and motioned for Naruto to continue. I need you to never use the sexy jutsu again, understand? Konohamaru didn't understand. But boss, why not? That jutsu is probably one of the best ever created. You said it even managed to defeat my grandfather. And besides, isn't that sexy jutsu one of your trademarks as a ninja? Hearing that last part made a shiver of displeasure run up Naruto's spine. Konohamaru, listen, I'm asking you not only as your friend but as your teacher, don't use that jutsu again. I'm starting to take my responsibilities seriously, and I want you to do the same thing, because I want you to be the best person qualified to replace me after I become emperor. When I become Hokage. Do you understand now? The boy gave a reluctant nod of understanding before his eyes brightened again in hope. So can we go back to training now, can we? I know I sidetracked us with my question, but I really wanna learn swordsmanship, boss. Chuckling at his student's zest for more training, Naruto nodded and after handing back the Pugio, ordered his student to return to his original spot and get ready for more. Neither one noticed the two sets of eyes on them. Jiraiya sat shocked. The Toad Sanin's eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing, so this is the new Naruto. It's unreal. Just a few weeks ago he'd be using that sexy jutsu to get me to train him, and now he's telling Sarutobi Sensei's grandson never to use it again. And on top of that, what's with the new attitude? Sure, I can still see traces of the old Naruto, but is this what Yuhi-san meant when she was talking about Naruto? Jiraiya wasn't entirely sure what to do with this new information. Without the input of knowledge his spy network would get from Wave in a few days, the Sannin was left with an incomplete picture. And then there's those strange weapons and fighting stance. The kid said that the weapons are from the time before the Sage, so maybe the stance is as well. I think, if I could get more information on the weapons and the stance, I might be able to put together more of this puzzle. And what was with that slip up earlier? What was he about to really say? With that thought, the Sannin disappeared in a swirl of leaves to report back to Tsunade. Shikamaru's ears and eyes must have been deceiving him, because there was no way that the blonde practicing in the training field was the Naruto he'd met back in the academy. Naruto was parrying blows, sidestepping slashes, and just using a sword in a way he'd never expected the clumsy Uzumaki capable of. Sure, he wasn't perfect, but the natural talent was clear to see. Shikamaru had gone from Naruto's house immediately to the training grounds with the original goal being to skip straight to the end of his search and just try again tomorrow, but he never thought he'd encounter something like the spectacle that played out before him. Like Naruto, Konohamaru also seemed to possess a natural talent for swordplay, as he performed various ducks and rolls before turning them into deadly slashes and even upward thrusts. But it was obvious that, due to his young age, he'd have some catching up to do if he wanted to be considered a competent sword user. But still, the fact that both of them possess such skill already is mind-boggling. And then the Nara recalled what he'd originally been sent out to investigate. Ino was right, Naruto's almost a completely different person now. I mean, sure, he's still got some of that old, Academy Naruto, in him, but not to the point anymore where it'd be considered annoying. In fact, I'd be hard-pressed not to call it charismatic. I still don't have enough information, like what he and Tazuna spoke of or where he spent most of his time on the mission. And then to top it off, he's using some ancient weapons and an unknown kenjutsu stance. I think if I can learn about those, it'll give me an idea of what went on in Wave, and more importantly, what sparked this new attitude. Putting such questions aside, the Nara heir returned his eyes to the spar in front of him. Uzero. Naruto stood, Gladius at his side, and stared across the field at his sparring partner. Konohamaru stood on shaking legs, Fujio held firmly in his hand. The boy was covered in bruises, grass and dirt stains littered his clothes, and a rivulet of dried blood hung out the corner of his mouth. He'd taken more hits than he'd managed to give, but at this thought he smiled, but I did manage to get in some hits. True to form, Naruto had shallow cuts on both legs and even a relatively nice one on his right arm, due to the blonde being unprepared for an assault above his stomach. Naruto had returned to his ready stance, eyes following Konohamaru as the boy paced from side to side, looking for an opening and thinking about his plan of attack. As he should be. Naruto noticed a change in his student's eyes and tensed his muscles in anticipation for his attack. Moments later, his readiness was rewarded. Konohamaru noticed a slight glaze in his mentor's eyes, taking this as a sign he'd momentarily dropped his guard. The boy ran in. When he got within correct distance, instead of rolling, Konohamaru shifted his weight to his left foot and jumped with it. Naruto, who'd been expecting the roll, was surprised when the boy leapt into the air and performed a horizontal slash at his chest. Thinking quickly, and forgetting that he'd foregone wearing his leather bracers, the blonde raised his arm and parried the blow. He followed this with a swift punch to the back of Konohamaru's head, and then jumping back to assess the damage. Konohamaru, although now with a face full of grass and dirt, couldn't hold back a smile at surprising his mentor and landing such an attack. While Naruto thought about his student's clever tactic, across the field the young Sarutobi's mind was on how tired that last assault had made him. Konohamaru decided he would go one more round before calling it quits for the day. So I better make this one count. The young Sarutobi, deciding on his initial attack plan, rushed forward to engage his mentor in a final round of swordplay. He started with a sweep slash, then, anticipating Naruto's jump back, Konohamaru used the momentum from his spin and turned it into a jab. Naruto parried his jab and struck with his fist, which caught the momentarily off-guard Konohamaru in the cheek. When Naruto went to press his attack with a Spartan kick, the academy student ducked under it and went to graze his mentor's unprotected side with his blade. Deciding that he'd done enough for one day, Konohamaru leapt back and dropped to his knees. Naruto noticed his student retreat and realized he'd had enough for the day. Sheathing his gladius, Naruto walked over to Konohamaru's kneeling form. You did well today, I'm proud of you, Konohamaru. When we started, I wasn't sure if you were going to be able to handle the seriousness of the training, but you surprised me, and I think I'm going to enjoy teaching you. The blonde's words made Konohamaru's pride swell and his eyes shine with happiness. Do you really mean that, boss? I mean, I didn't really do very well, and I kept retreating without ever making you retreat once. Hey, that's not important. We're both just starting out, so I'm not expecting either of us to be top-notch fighters just yet. You managed to hold your own, and even get in a few blows on me, that's what matters right now. And, in time, you will improve and become a force to be reckoned with. Naruto allowed a sincere smile to ghost across his lips, just enough to be noticeable, and said, now that training's over, how about we? The blonde was cut off by the sound of leaves rustling. Ooh zero ooh. Shit. 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 He heard me leaving. Okay. Calm down, I'll just make it look like I stumbled on them. It works out, I guess, but I really wish our meeting would have been under better circumstances. Shikamaru thought as he stood stock still behind his tree. After it looked like the two were done training, Shikamaru decided he'd go home and formulate his wordplay strategy when he searched out Naruto the following day, but he'd been too noisy in his retreat. So, the young Nara stepped out from his hiding space and, doing his best to shove away the nervousness, spoke up. Hey Naruto, sorry if I was interrupting anything, I was just trying to find you so I could ask you about your mission to Wave. Why did I just say that? The Nara heir thought in a panic. Naruto's cobalt eyes hardened at the sound of the other boy's statement, why do you wanna ask me about my mission? I don't remember you ever being interested in anything I've done before, so why now? What made this particular mission so interesting? The blonde wasn't sure, but he thought he saw a bead of sweat roll down Shikamaru's face. Sigh, I might as well tell him. Damn it all, how could I let myself be caught off guard like this? Well, Ino was going on and on about how you apparently have your own bridge, with statues and everything, and how nice the place looked now. I found it a little hard to believe, you know how Ino is, so I figured you'd be the best person to ask about whether what she said was true or not. Naruto stared into his fellow graduate's eyes for what seemed like an eternity, his cobalt gaze searching, looking for the real reason for Shikamaru's visit. While he found something, he couldn't fully identify it before Konohamaru spoke up. Boss, we can go get food tomorrow if it's okay. My mom probably wants me home, I didn't exactly tell her where I was going today. And besides, you should catch up with your friend. Konohamaru began to exit the training ground, stopping to find out what time he should show up tomorrow, then continued on his way home. Now the two ninja were alone. Shikamaru felt uncomfortable standing there alone with Naruto. Had this been a number of weeks ago, the Nara was sure this feeling wouldn't exist, but now, he wasn't sure just what it was he was dealing with. Naruto, on the other hand, recognized the opportunity that he'd just been presented. With Konohamaru gone, Naruto was now able to jump ahead with his plans. After readying himself, Naruto spoke. Shikamaru, I know why you're really here. The aforementioned boy's eyes widened in shock. Ino told you about my strange behavior in Wave, and you wanted to see for yourself. It's okay, Yano, I just wish you'd been more straightforward with me. Naruto's tone, as well as his understanding for Shikamaru's spying, surprised the young clan heir. He'd been expecting harsh words and icy stares, but instead he was presented with the man before him. Well, Ino was right about one thing, Naruto's definitely changed. And Naruto, if I offended you, I didn't mean it. It's just that Ino wouldn't stop talking about how strange you'd been acting, and then she said she was gonna come and question you, but since I wasn't sure how you'd react, I told I'd come and talk to you. Naruto, I'm not judging you or telling you to go back to how you were, I'm just curious. Shikamaru had never been in this position before, and so he was unprepared to handle it. Naruto was calm on the outside, but inside the wolf was snarling, Ino, that nosy bitch. I was so focused on throwing off Kurenai-sensei that I forgot about Ino and her habit of sticking her nose in other people's business. Damn it all, how could I have been so stupid? My plans haven't even had time to begin and already I'm going to have to deal with a loose end. I'm just lucky it's only Ino, she'll be easy to handle. Making plans to handle his fellow blonde later, Naruto returned his attention to his current predicament, getting Shikamaru on his side. Shikamaru, like I said, it's okay. I understand you're just looking out for a friend, and why wouldn't you? Ino's such a nice, smart, beautiful girl, and I know you'd never want anything bad to happen to her, even if it was just a scolding for her nosy tendencies. But rest assured, I have no plans to harm or be aggressive towards your teammate. Hearing this put the young Chunin's mind more at ease, but was still curious about a few things, so he decided to broach the subject. I'm glad to hear that. I've been meaning to ask, Naruto, what's up with the new weapons? Well, I picked them up when I was in Wave Country on that mission. The longer blade on my right hip is called a gladius, and this shorter one on my left hip is known as a pugio. Both are from a time before the Sage of Six Paths, when people fought with real skill and not just flashy jutsus, but you already knew that part, didn't you? Shikamaru, if you actually want to know about my weapons all you have to do is ask, I won't lie to you. Although Naruto didn't actually know that Shikamaru had been watching him, the blonde took a gamble and watched to see the Chunin's reaction. He wasn't disappointed. Shikamaru visibly flinched. I thought he hadn't noticed till just a few minutes ago, and spoke up. You're right, Naruto, I should have just asked, can you tell me a little more about them? Like where they're from maybe. Bingo, there's the question I've been waiting for. It's okay, Shikamaru. These weapons are from an ancient empire known as Rome, although, Rome itself was just a small city, but it grew into an empire by annexing other cities and villages. The gladius was the main weapon of choice for their soldiers, while the pugio was the sidearm. The gladius was mainly a thrusting weapon but could be used to slash as well. Apparently, Rome became one of the small elemental countries after the sage came along and introduced chakra, whirlpool, I think the name was. Something about the name, whirlpool, clicked in Shikamaru's mind. Although not entirely sure where he'd heard it, the shadow manipulator was positive he had. I'll go and talk to Dad about it. I think I've got enough information to start putting together this puzzle. Well, Naruto, thank you for alleviating my worries about Ino, and for telling me as much as you did. I know you didn't have to, and it's nice to know you trust me with stuff like this. Unfortunately, I have to get going, otherwise I run the risk of angering my mother. I was supposed to help care for the deer today. Naruto nodded in understanding. It's fine, Shikamaru, you go ahead, I have some other things I need to do today. And in regards to the information, I know I can trust you with it. With another nod, Shikamaru turned and exited the training grounds, completely missing the sly smile that slipped into place on Naruto's face. Ooh. Shikamaru's mind was a storm of questions. After leaving Naruto at the training ground, the young Chunin's mind had been plagued by questions about just what all the information, along with Naruto's new attitude, could mean. Knowing that he was still at a disadvantage without knowing what Naruto found on his mission to Wave, Shikamaru decided the only real option was to speak with his father about Whirlpool, and hopefully, Rome. But Naruto said he trusted me, so doesn't that mean going to my dad with this information is a violation of that trust? Or maybe, he meant it in that he trusted me not to give out this information to just anyone, like Ino or even Choji. His resolve re-strengthened, Shikamaru continued on through the village, and headed home, where I hope I can get some more answers. Shikamaru walked into his home and was met with a common sound, his parents arguing. Rather than sit and wait for something that could take hours, the young shadow manipulator walked into his living room and interrupted his mother's tirade. Hey, Dad, I need to talk to you. I've been given some interesting information, and was hoping you could help me sort through it. Shikaku Nara was an almost older copy of Shikamaru. The only real difference being the scars on his face and the facial hair he had on his chin. Sure son, we can go out by the deer and talk. So father and son walked off, leaving an enraged Nara matriarch that both men knew they'd be dealing with later. Once outside, Shikamaru's stomach began to do flips. He began to question whether telling his father was a good idea, but then the thought of leaving the puzzle unfinished goaded the young man into speaking. Dad, what can you tell me about Whirlpool Country? Shikaku, who had been expecting any myriad of things, was unprepared for his son's question. He hadn't been expecting his son to bring up a destroyed old village, and his shock showed in his response. Why do you want to know about Whirlpool, son? That village has been deserted for years, no one's even set foot on its soil since the country itself was destroyed. I'm curious because I talked with Naruto today and he'd mentioned it. He also told me that the village also used to be called Rome, which had been a vast empire back before the Sage of Six Paths introduced chakra to the world. Now Shikakao's interest had really been struck. How had Naruto learned of his mother's home, and more importantly, how had he learned of its ancient history? Shikamaru, how did Naruto come across this knowledge exactly? I know they only mention the land of whirlpools in passing at the academy, and there aren't any books about it in any of the libraries, so where did young Naruto learn of the village's existence? The Nara heir was a little disturbed to know that, not just a single village, but an entire country had been stricken from history. But, knowing that he had to push that information to the side for now, Shikamaru answered, he went on a mission to Wave Country recently, and I guess, he learned of it there. He also returned with some weapons that he says are the same types of weapons those ancient Romans used, a gladius and pugio, I think they were called. Really? He had weapons fashioned for himself. Well, Shikamaru, I suppose I can tell you a little bit about what you want to know. For starters, did you know that the Nara clan is able to trace its roots back to the time of the Roman Empire? The young Chunan's eyes widened at this. Yep, but we weren't always referred to as Nara. Our house name used to be Crassus. And one ancestor in particular was extremely well known. His name was Marcus Crassus, and he was a part of something known as the Triumvirate, along with two other Romans. What's a triumvirate, and who were the other two members? Well, a triumvirate is a political power, I guess you could call it. As its name says, it's made up of three men, usually the three most influential men in an area. The triumvirate I'm speaking of was made up of our ancestor Marcus Crassus, a general by the name of Pompey Magnus, and another man named Julius Caesar. For some reason, hearing the name, Caesar, caused a knot to form in the young Shikamaru's stomach. Ino sat in her parents' flower shop, bored to tears. She'd gone home after her talk with Shikamaru and was met by her parents, both looking ready to leave. They told her that she would be responsible for the shop for the rest of the day, as the two of them had work to do, her father in the T&I department, her mother a trip to another village. So, after they left, Ino cleaned up and changed into an orange t-shirt that stopped above her navel along with a pair of white shorts that stopped mid-thigh. Normally the young Kunoichi didn't mind tending the shop, and at times even enjoyed it, but with only a handful of customers that day, and the still unsolved mystery of the new Naruto, Ino wanted to be anywhere but the flower shop. Her attention was then turned to the door as its signal bell rang. Hello and welcome to. The young blonde was silenced by the figure standing at the door, Naruto. Naruto, what are you doing in a flower shop? Hoping to find a gift for Sakura, I suppose. Her guess was met with a light chuckle. No, in fact, I've come to the conclusion that Sakura's not worth chasing anymore. I've actually come by to talk to you, Ino. Ino was a little unnerved by the tone of her fellow blonde's voice near the end of his statement. He sounded upset. Listen, Naruto, if you're here to ask me out, I'm gonna. Naruto didn't give her the chance to finish. Why are you snooping around my business, Ino? By this time Naruto had locked the door and flipped the open sign to closed. And don't bother denying it, Shikamaru already gave you up. All I wanna know is, why? If you're not interested in me, then I see no reason you'd take such a sudden interest in anything I do. Naruto had rounded the counter by this time, and was backing Ino against the wall, where a tall shelf that stored arrangement displays his the two blondes from view of people on the street. Ino's face erupted into a fierce blush at how close Naruto was to her. She had put up her hands to stop his advance, and without his bulky orange jacket she could feel his developing muscles, and couldn't stop herself from lightly groping the boy's pectoral muscles. In spite of how she acted, Ino had never had any experience with a guy. She tried to look away and put together a believable excuse, but she couldn't pull her eyes away from Naruto's smoldering, cobalt gaze. Wait, is his face getting closer? Naruto's face was getting closer. He brought his lips up to the young heiress' ear and spoke again. Ino, you wound me. I'd be more than happy to enlighten you about not only what I was doing in Wave, but also my new attitude. All I need from you is, Naruto had brought his hands up and was lightly ghosting his fingers up and down her bare sides, silence. I don't want you running around and telling everybody about what I'm going to tell you, alright? Naruto pulled away from Ino's ear, but now he was close enough that their noses brushed against one another. He brought his right hand up, the left still occupied with massaging Ino's side, and cupped her face in its palm. His hands are so warm. The platinum blonde didn't know what to do. She felt like she was getting ready to slink to the floor. Naruto's breath on her ear had caused her knees to shake. The hand massaging her bare side formed a pool of heat in her stomach and a lump in her throat. No longer was she trying to hide her feeling along his torso. Her hands had minds of their own. She was drawn from her euphoric feeling by Naruto speaking again. We can talk more about this tomorrow, when you won't be so busy. Naruto completely pulled away and began walking towards the door. Once he reached it and was about to leave, he said, "Oh, and if those lips of yours can't keep quiet, I'm sure we can find other things to occupy their time with." And with that he exited the store and began to walk home. Back in the store, Ino, released from the spell of Naruto's eyes, finally gave up and fell to the floor. Naruto was extremely proud of himself. He hadn't expected his meeting with Ino to go so well. He'd found another skill he had that he could use to persuade people to his side. After Shikamaru left him at the training ground, Naruto had been trying to come up with a way to deal with Ino. Every idea he came up with at first involved intimidation and/or physical harm, but he knew he wasn't well versed in intimidation yet, and any physical means would be noticed by others. He'd almost gotten to the flower shop, and was going to try intimidating her. No time to try like the present, when he saw them. He noticed a young civilian couple standing outside a shop flirting. The boy had his girlfriend held lightly against the store's wall, and was speaking into her ear while lightly kissing and biting her neck. Naruto stood and stared for a moment before a wolfish smile made its way onto his face again. I know exactly how to handle this, the blonde thought to himself as he made to enter the shop. With his problem with Ino handled, Naruto could now go home and focus on how he could put this new skill to use during his talk with Hinata the next morning. Everything seems to be coming together quite nicely. The sun rose, signaling the start of a new day, and one of the first people up to greet it was Hinata Hyuga. The young heiress awoke with a smile on her face. The dream she'd had was a very pleasant one. Getting up and stretching, Hinata remembered that today she was going to be spending time with her Naruto-kun. I wonder what he wants to talk about. After performing her morning rituals, Hinata exited the clan compound and began walking to her team's training ground. As usual, she was the first one to arrive, so she decided to perform some stretches while she waited. As she performed a split, then reached forward to touch her toes, Hinata sensed that she was being watched. Staying in her current position, she activated her Byakugan and scanned the area. Hinata quickly turned off her dojutsu and gasped. It was Naruto. After a short rustling of the leaves, the blue-eyed blonde entered into the clearing and waited for the young kunoichi to face him. Hinata finished her current stretch and stood to address her Naruto-kun. Gee, good morning Naruto-kun, is there something you needed? I was under the impression that our meeting would be taking place after my morning training. It still is, I just wanted to come by before your team got here and see you, if that's alright. I know it sounds strange, but I was feeling off this morning, and at first, I couldn't understand why. But then I realized what was missing. Like with Ino, Naruto had gotten close enough that he was able to wrap his arms around the brunette's waist. I hadn't seen you yet. I'd gotten so used to waking up to your beautiful face in the morning during that mission, that I don't think my day will ever be right again without seeing you. Hinata's face burned a new shade of red at not only the close proximity of her Naruto-kun, but also his loving words that were amplified by the heart-stopping look in his eyes. She'd brought her hands up, like Ino had done, and was greeted by the same muscled chest that she'd experienced too. The biggest difference was, Hinata didn't try to hide her explorations. Naruto felt this, but didn't mind if it helped solidify his hold on the young heiress. His coming out this early was another gamble, something I seemed to be doing a lot lately, but it seemed to be bearing favorable results. While I love that I've gotten to see you this morning, I should get going before your sensei shows up. I don't think she liked me very much. But I'll be by again in a few hours to get you, okay? Hinata, voice failing her, just nodded her head. Naruto decided to leave the girl with something to hang off of, and leaned down to place a kiss on her cheek. Then, the blonde let the girl go and walked off. Hinata couldn't believe it. Her Naruto-kun had come just to see her, said he loved seeing her, and even given her a kiss. Sure, it was on the cheek, but it was a kiss nonetheless. He'd even held her in such an intimate position. Finally, with all the excitement colliding at once, Hinata fainted with a smile on her face. Ooh. The rest of Team 8 finally arrived and, after waking Hinata, commenced with their training session. It was quickly learned that a happy Hinata was a productive Hinata. Her spars were quick, she defeated both Shino and Kiba swiftly, taking virtually no time at all. This strange increase in skill intrigued Kurenai. She wanted to test the girl herself. Alright Hinata, since you've done so well so far, how about you and I spar? I know I usually only spar with Kiba and Shino, but you seem to be on your A game today and I'd be a fool not to test you at your best. What do you say? That would be great Kurenai-sensei, thank you. While on the outside Hinata seemed excited, on the inside she was frowning. It was true, Kurenai had sparred solely with her two male teammates, and any time Hinata asked to spar the Genjutsu mistress would say, I'm not sure you're really up to it yet Hinata, I know you'll hold back, and I don't want to risk seriously injuring you. How was she supposed to get stronger, and show her Naruto-kun her strength, if her teacher refused to help her? Hinata walked over to her side of the field and entered into her gentle fist stance, Byakugan eyes blazing. Kurenai barely had any time to settle into a stance before the young heiress rushed her. Kurenai sidestepped a palm thrust and retaliated with a right cross. Hinata ducked under her sensei's counterattack, and spinning on the ball of her foot, sent a roundhouse kick into the red-eyed woman's stomach, sending her back a few steps. Deciding to press her advantage, Hinata once again rushed forward with a palm strike. Kurenai was shocked when her student managed to evade her attack and then turn it into a counterattack. Before she could check the damage to her stomach, the Junin was again forced to evade a palm thrust, only this time it was followed up by Hinata taking hold of Kurenai's arm and tossing the woman over her shoulder. Again the red-eyed Junin's eyes widened as she righted herself in the air. Landing on her feet, she was given no time to reset herself, because her student was upon her again. Hinata's heart beat heavily against her ribcage. She was giving everything she had, pushing herself beyond her normal limits in order to do as well as she was. Normally she wouldn't have even landed a hit on her sensei, but today she felt as if she could do anything. When she noticed her teacher righting herself in midair, Hinata took off in another sprint, making sure that when Kurenai landed she'd be there to meet her. Opting for a different approach this time, Hinata dropped to the ground and attempted to sweep her sensei's legs out from under her. It failed though because Kurenai jumped back to avoid it, giving her enough time to yell, "Stop." Hinata lifted herself off the ground and used the reprieve to take deep breaths, trying her best to calm her rapidly beating heart. What none of them noticed were a pair of cobalt eyes zeroed in on the young Hyuga. After a few more hours of chakra exercises, some more light sparring, and practicing team strategies, Kurenai realized that there was nothing left she could use to keep Hinata from meeting with Naruto. Alright team, training's over for the day. We're going to be taking a mission tomorrow. I've already spoken with Lady Tsunade about giving us an out of the village, rank mission. Hearing this bit of news caused her female student's eyes to widen. But Kurenai-sensei, you and I just got back from one of those. Wouldn't it make more sense for us to take some rank missions for a while? Kurenai raised an eyebrow at this. In truth, Kurenai had asked for such a mission after deciding that she wanted to keep as much distance as possible between her student and the new Naruto. While that is technically true, our last mission wasn't really what I would call a real mission, more like a trip. This mission that we're going on is a bandit extraction. You three are going to be performing your first kills. Her last statement caused all three young ninjas' eyes to widen. While they each knew that the day would come where they would have to kill, they were unprepared for it to be so soon. Before any of you speak out, let me tell you, I believe that each of you are capable of taking a life. Hinata was shaking on the inside. She feared not only taking a life, but she also feared messing up and coming home to a disappointed Naruto telling her how useless she was. After saying another goodbye, and sending her gentle student a reassuring look, Kurenai left in a swirl of leaves. Kiba and Shino, both still shocked to silence by the news, just left without saying goodbye. Hinata, who was staying behind to wait for Naruto, sunk to her knees and held herself. She tried to pull herself together, not wanting to have her Naruto-kun find her in such a weak state, but she just continued to shiver, eyes wide and glazed over. She was so deep in her thoughts, she didn't realize she was no longer alone until she felt a hand cup her face and she was staring into a set of gentle, cobalt blue eyes. Hinata. Hey, what's wrong? Hey, come on, it's me, Naruto, I had something I wanted to talk to you about, remember? Ooh. Naruto had left the training ground like he said, but the blonde had returned shortly after when he knew everyone would be occupied with training, and wouldn't have noticed him. He watched as his little pet project dominated her two teammates, swiftly defeating them as if they were children. Then, he had a front row seat as Hinata gave her Junin-sensei a run for her money. That, coupled with the girl's budding knowledge of medicine, and Hinata was proving that she would become a very useful addition to his army. When he heard about their mission, Naruto ground his teeth in anger. He knew immediately that Kurenai's plan was to separate the two of them. She was trying to block all of Naruto's advances. But that anger was swiftly pushed aside when he saw his perfect tool begin to break down. Knowing that he was what she needed right now, Naruto came out of his tree and walked over to her. Ooh. Hinata slowly came back to reality. First thing she noticed were a set of eyes that belonged to her Naruto-kun. Suddenly, Hinata couldn't hold it in anymore and she began to cry. She laid her head on his shoulder and let the tears flow down her cheeks. While she didn't wish to appear weak, Hinata knew she wouldn't be able to make it through their discussion without breaking down. So, she cried into her love's shoulder, gasping when she felt Naruto put his arms around her and cradle the young heiress in his lap. It was in this position the two of them stayed in for over a half hour. When Hinata's tears finally subsided, she pulled away from Naruto, and sat on her knees in front of him. I'm sorry about that, Naruto-kun, I didn't mean to fall apart on you like that, it's just. I'm afraid of messing up on my next mission. Kurenai-sensei wants me to kill, and I'm not sure if I can. Naruto nodded in understanding, his mind already figuring out how to turn this into something useful, when he suddenly had an idea. Hinata, don't even worry about it, I know you'll do just fine. You may not be able to see it, but I can see that you have the resolve to kill. I understand that it'll be hard, but I want you to know that when you come back, I'll personally be here to help you through your trauma. Hinata felt her heart skip a beat at her Naruto-kun's words, knowing that he was willing to be there for her in such a delicate time made her believe that Naruto really did care. Thank you, Naruto-kun. Kurenai didn't say anything other than, I know you three will be able to handle this, and then just left while giving me this pitying look, as if she already anticipated my failure. Listen, Hinata, if you don't feel up to having out talk, I'll understand. You've just gone through a very rough time and I don't want to push you past your limits. Our conversation can. No, it's okay, I'm fine. Please, don't worry about what just happened, I'm sure what you wanted to talk about is important. Naruto had to hold back his smirk at hearing Hinata's words, he knew that she'd want to still have the talk just to spend more time with him. He decided he could trust her with what he'd learned. Okay, Hinata, what I wanted to talk to you about was what I discovered in Wave Country. Naruto sat on his bed reading. His jumpsuit replaced by his crimson tunic, his ninja sandals replaced by his leather boots. It had been days since his talk with Hinata, and as he'd hoped, she was completely on board. Well, not completely on board. The young blonde remembered how worried his follower had been about his plan backfiring. After telling Hinata of his secret agenda in Wave, Naruto relayed his plan to the devoted Hyuga sitting across from him. He'd informed her that, once he'd become Hokage, he'd work to rebuild the Roman Empire. While she seemed content with his overall decision, and was even more pleased by her place in his plan, Naruto could still see a hint of doubt in her lavender eyes. When asked, she replied, But Naruto-kun, how do I intend to resurrect your ancestral homeland? Even when you become Hokage, the people may not take kindly to the changes you'll want to make. Naruto just chuckled a bit before answering, Hinata, that's what I need people like you and Ino for, remember. If I get enough council supporters, then I'll be able to pass the laws necessary to begin rebuilding the empire back to its former glory. I guess you're right. I just don't want to see you come close to your dream and fail. After Naruto had set his tool's mind at ease, he was able to return home to his studies. He had at least a dozen books to work through, and he'd barely made a dent in the first one. Naruto wanted to punch himself for his stupidity as a child, back when he thought books were useless, when he thought all you needed to be a great warrior and a great leader were flashy moves and cool lines. What a fool he'd been. Reading just a third of Caesar's first book made the blonde view himself differently. And while he didn't fully grasp everything the mont's words meant, Naruto truly began to understand that his brain was just as powerful a weapon as any jutsu or summoning. At the moment, Naruto was swept up in a section that spoke of, honestly, what Naruto was currently doing. Quote, I practically strolled right into the jaws of the beast. My mission was clear: disrupt the rebellion from the inside. I remained unshorn, to better blend in with what Metellus referred to as the pack of savage dogs. The fool. Spartacus was no savage dog, but a warrior truly worthy of the legend he carried. He was not just some errant slave. I weaved myself in early by assisting Spartacus with dispatching the other Romans who attempted to infiltrate alongside me. After that, I was quickly singled out by the god of the arena, Gannicus, and asked to demonstrate my skills. A well-thought plan, but I am not your average Roman, and I would not be fooled. So I gave them just enough to impress, but not so much that they become suspicious. It wasn't long after I was defeated that I found myself introduced to a rebel named Nemitz. Now he was truly unworthy of being called brother. But he served me well in my endeavors, and in the end I gladly made the animal pay for what he did to that woman Fabia. Truly a terrible thing. Sad really, how easily I infiltrated the rebel camp, and with but cunning and silver tongue. Naruto, having already read of Caesar's interaction with Crassus and their plans, understood, in its entirety, the passage he'd just read. Rome had been plagued by a rebellious uprising of slaves, led by a former gladiator named Spartacus. Caesar, just returning from a campaign abroad, was swiftly retrieved by Marcus Crassus and entered into an alliance with the man, their first task together being the bringing about the end of the rebellion and death of Spartacus. The passage clearly resembled Naruto's own actions, in that he was turning members of the Leaf Village to his whims with just his words alone. Deciding he'd read enough for that moment, Naruto returned the book to its drawer, strapped on his weapons, and exited his apartment. His destination being the training grounds. Uzero-u. Naruto entered into his chosen clearing and summoned a shadow clone to spar with. Naruto understood that to truly get better, Konohamaru could not be his true sparring partner. Both blondes unsheathed their swords and stood in their ready positions. The clone struck first. The clone began with a horizontal slash. When Naruto parried it, the clone went for an vertical swing, trying to split his creator up the middle. Naruto evaded the attack by hopping backwards and then going on the offensive. Naruto swung his sword in a ground sweep, hoping to catch his clone in the legs. The clone, however, anticipated this and jumped over the attack, but he was unprepared for the kick that followed and so was hit squarely in the chest and sent staggering back. Naruto tried to follow this up by decapitating his clone, but the look-alike ducked under the swing and brought his own weapon down, and almost managed to score a blow across Naruto's chest, but the blonde brought his arm up and parried the bow with his bare forearm like he'd done against Konohamaru. I have got to remember to start wearing my leather bracers. Naruto thought to himself as he looked over the wound on his arm. The sound of crunching grass alerted Naruto that his clone was ready for another round. This time the clone started with a jab, and when Naruto parried, the clone used the momentum to bring his sword up for another try at an undercut. This time Naruto barely dodged the attack by twisting his body to the side. Following up his evasion, Naruto continued the spin, and slammed the flat of his sword into his clone's back, causing it to poof out of existence. Not a moment later Naruto summoned another clone and rushed it. Uzero-u. Naruto walked through the busy streets of Konoha, his destination being the Yamanaka flower shop. While he'd told Ino they would talk the same day he spoke with Hinata, he decided instead to let her wait. Naruto wanted her to be on edge, looking over her shoulder as she waited for him to fetch her. I'm really starting to enjoy this, Naruto laughed quietly to himself. He chose to forego changing into his jumpsuit, remembering how Ino had reacted to seeing him without the top. Naruto hoped to use that to his advantage during their discussion today. It didn't take him long to retrace his steps, and before long he found himself once again standing at the door to Ino's family business. Walking in he was greeted with the sight of Inoichi, Ino's father. Hello Mr. Yamanaka, Ino wouldn't happen to be here would she? She and I were supposed to discuss something a few days ago, but I got caught up in some personal matters and was unable to show up. Is she available now? Inoichi was a bit skeptical of the blonde in front of him. It wasn't that he disliked Naruto, more rather, the boy had no real relationship to his daughter, so what could they have to talk about? Actually Naruto, I do happen to know where my daughter is, but, in the years since my daughter's known you I can't recall the two of you ever being very close. What is it that the two of you have to discuss? Naruto managed to hold back his flinch. He should have known that the man in front of him was no pushover. Naruto had heard of Ino's father before, a high-ranking member of the T&I department and a master of the human mind. It's no wonder his usual level of silver speak wasn't going to be enough to get by Inoichi. That's exactly what we're going to talk about. See, we have known each other for a long time, but the two of us have yet to form any kind of friendship. I had been thinking about that while we were in Wave, and I'd decided that Ino and I should rectify our non-friendship. Your daughter seems like a very intelligent girl, one I myself could benefit greatly by knowing. I'm sure there are many things she could teach me that I've missed out on due to my prankster ways back in the academy. Naruto had thrown in the last bit, about Ino being a resource of knowledge, to help cement his claim of trying to be friends. And because Inoichi seemed like the overprotective father that needed a reason to allow a person to associate with his daughter. Inoichi, his eyebrow still raised in skepticism, decided that he'd give the blonde boy the benefit of the doubt. Okay Naruto, Ino's out with her mother getting ingredients for dinner tonight. Just go down to the market district and you'll find them there. Make sure to let my wife know I said it was okay to let you pull Ino away, but I expect her back before I finish my shift at the store, understand? Ino Yamanaka was not having a good week. After her encounter with Naruto, Ino had been on edge. Her mind would flash back to that moment her fellow blonde had her pinned against the wall, his breath brushing hot against her ear, his hands leaving trails of fire along her sides. Ino's dreams were filled with replays of that moment, and the different ways it could have ended. Ino's face erupted into a fierce blush as she walked alongside her mother. Why am I still thinking about it? It's not as if I really enjoyed it. It has to be because it's the first time I've ever been in that kind of situation, yeah, that's it. A voice saying her name brought the kunoichi out of her thoughts. Hey, Ino, I've been looking for you. Turning to face her caller, Ino's eyes nearly popped out of her head when she saw that it was Naruto. Naruto, what are you doing here? Haha, don't you remember Ino, you and I were going to hang out. Ya know, since we've never really been friends, and we decided that we should make an effort to be, remember? Ino did remember talk they were supposed to have, but that should have been days ago. Unless he did that on purpose, because he knew I'd be all jumpy if he made me wait. That little punk. The platinum blonde's eyes narrowed after her realization. When she came back out of her thoughts, Ino saw Naruto speaking with her mother. Apparently the young boy had managed to convince her father that she and Naruto were trying to work on their friendship. That crafty little, well, if it's only for a few hours then, sure, I don't see why Ino can't spend some time with you. Ino's mother said, that's great, thank you Mrs. Yamanaka, I'll be sure to not keep her to myself for too long. Naruto replied with a big smile. Taking the shocked Ino's hand, Naruto began to guide her towards the training grounds so that they could talk. It didn't take long before Naruto and Ino arrived at a training field the boy deemed secluded enough. When the young genin stopped, Ino finally managed to pull herself together enough that she ripped her hand out of Naruto's grip. Who do you think you are? First, you act all weird on our mission, then you come into my family's flower shop and, well you practically molested me you stupid jerk. And now you're pulling me away from my mother, after keeping me all flustered the whole week. Her last statement brought Naruto's eyebrow up in amusement as he responded. Flustered huh? Well if it made you so hot under the collar, then you must have enjoyed it on some level, right? Naruto stood up straight with his arms crossed behind his back, hands gripping the opposite wrist, and his chest puffed out as he smirked at the female blonde standing within arm's reach of him. I'll hold back for right now, see if I can break through her defenses with words first. Ino's cheeks once again took on a light pink hue, and she turned her eyes away for a moment to recollect herself and bring back her anger. She hadn't been expecting Naruto to catch her slip up, nor did she guess that he would throw it back in her face. I thought Naruto was supposed to be dumb. What the heck is going on here? Seeing the confused look on the girl's face, Naruto guessed her thoughts and decided to answer her question. If you're wondering about my new personality, like I said the other day, all you have to do is ask. Ino, I don't really know what you think is going on, but I'm not a bad guy. I just had a wake-up call during our trip to Wave, and I made the decision to change myself, to become more serious. But what does that have to do with those weird secret talks you had with Tazuna-san, or when you would disappear for most of the day and then come back right as everyone was finishing dinner? I can understand that you want to be more serious, and in turn, be taken more seriously, but you're weirding me out Naruto. Her rant started off strong, her voice level. But by the end it sounded desperate and a little afraid. Naruto had picked up on Ino's change in tone easily and was quick to decipher how to use it to his advantage. Ino, my decision has everything to do with those talks and my disappearances, Naruto began, his voice soft. I learned some interesting things about my family history that made me reevaluate myself and my current attitude. Ino, I really am serious about asking me. I don't mind telling you about my discoveries. The level of sincerity in Naruto's voice, along with his open body language, made Ino truly believe what her fellow blonde was saying to her. It made feel like he trusted her. And Naruto, I know I have a habit of being a gossip, so the fact that you're willing to trust me with your secrets, it means a lot to me. Okay. My first question is, what did you and Tazuna-san talk about that first night we stayed in Wave? Ooh. Ino's eyes fluttered open, her vision hazy as she went to wipe her eyes. At first she was unsure of where she was, but when the young Kunoichi took notice of the sea of red she lay upon, she remembered. She and Naruto had talked for over an hour about the boy's personal adventure in Wave, then, things took an interesting turn. Ino wasn't sure how it started really. One moment she was standing across from Naruto, he seemed to be flirting with her like before in her family's shop, the next the girl was wrapped in his arms and his mouth found itself occupied with her neck. Flashback. Wide blue eyes swiftly found themselves squeezed shut in pleasure. Ino threw her head back and let out a gasp. Naruto had attached his lips to her pulse point and began work on leaving a hickey. While his mouth was busy with her neck, Naruto busied his hands with Ino's body. His left was brought upward, where it began gently massaging her right, while his right hand slid down and cupped the young Kunoichi's. With so many spots being pleasured at once, Ino was forced to wrap her arms around her fellow blonde's neck to keep from falling to her knees. Naruto continued this triple threat for a few moments, before pulling away from her neck, and moving both hands to her hips. He began to trace little circles on her hips with his thumbs as his commanding, cobalt gaze stared directly into Ino's own powder blue pair. Ino, the things that I've told you, Naruto whispered, you must never reveal to anyone without my permission, do you understand? The platinum blonde took in deep breaths, trying to recover from her near-orgasmic experience, and then replied, yes, huff, I understand, huff, Naruto-ku, gasp. Ino's reply was cut short when Naruto returned to her pulse point for a moment. When we are alone, you will refer to me as Naruto-sama. We are not equals, you do not stand beside me in this. You will refer to me as Dominus. End flashback. Immediately after, Naruto and Ino engaged in a long session of heavy petting that led them to the tree Naruto now sat against, Ino curled up in his lap. When Ino remembered the events that led to her present state, she could feel her face erupt in heat. She had never been intimate with a boy before, and here she was, having her first experience with Naruto of all people. And yet, the thought of Naruto and her doing it all again made her heartbeat quicken. Ooh. Naruto stood at the center of the training field, his cobalt eyes staring across the grass at several, similar, pairs. The blonde had decided to up his training. Standing within 20 feet were 3 copies of Naruto, all dressed in red tunics, and all standing in the ready stance, their swords all pointed at Naruto. Naruto attacked first. He swung at the clone on the left, Clone 1, a diagonal slash to the chest. When his attack was parried, Naruto had no time to try again because he was forced to duck under a jab from the center clone, Clone 2. Naruto answered this with a quick elbow to the clone's midsection. Before he could press his attack, Naruto was forced to jump back and avoid a swing from the forgotten clone on his right, Clone 3. Following directly after, the blonde twisted out of the way of a jab sent by the Clone 1, who had stepped up to get within striking distance. Naruto continued his spin, but lowered himself so as to be able to reach his attacker's leg with a sweep strike. Clone 1 realized this and lifted its leg to avoid the attack. Clone 2, having recovered from the blow to its stomach, brought down his gladius in a vertical slash meant to split open his creator's skull. The move would have succeeded, had Naruto not seen it out of the corner of his eye, and brought his own Gladius up to block it. Blades locked, Naruto swiftly rose from his crouch, throwing Clone 2 off balance, and Spartan kicking it in the chest. Any thoughts of a follow-up attack were stricken from mind when Naruto felt a sharp sting in his right shoulder. Clone 1 had gotten behind him and managed to land a blow. Naruto's clones quickly backed away, waiting for word from their creator. Naruto stood there, his eyes gazing down at his own shoulder. He would have to get the tunic repaired, of that there was no doubt, and I suppose I'll send a letter to Tsuchi saying that I'll need more than just this one. Rotating his already healing shoulder, Naruto re-entered his stance and said, "Is that all you have to offer?" The clones smirked at one another before re-engaging Naruto in combat. Zero. Naruto sat, once again, on his bed with book clutched in hand. It had been about a month since he had begun working on breaking down Ino's resolve. She tried to fight it heavily in the beginning, saying that Naruto had used some kind of jutsu on her. The blonde quickly put those claims to rest when Naruto asked if she wished to be checked by a senior officer. So now, while she was still resistant, Ino was much more submissive than in the beginning. Naruto was currently on Caesar's third military log. He'd learned how Caesar and his ally Crassus had managed to take back the city of Sinuessa, but was angered at how Crassus' son, Tiberius, shunned Caesar's offer of friendship. The jealous fool even tried to have Caesar killed by releasing a captured rebel during a celebration. As I stood there, grinning at my opponent, I could see out of the corner of my eye Tiberius trying to hold back a smirk. As if he'd just put in motion some master plan. My skills were sloppy since I'd been drinking that night, but then the wine was of the perfect age, how could I not partake in it? Yet, despite my inebriated state, I managed to hold my own against the rebel. Even when he'd backed me into a corner, and it seemed, according to that preening little Metellus, like I would be defeated, my sharp mind still managed to find an opening. I noticed the rebel had a wound in his side, no doubt caused by one of our own soldiers. I struck it with my elbow and the man was quick to back away in pain. I sneered at the fool. Who did he think he was, believing himself a match for the honored Caesar? What followed was a brief scuffle, in which he managed to wound me, before I cut open the man's stomach. The rebel fell to his knees after that, but when I paid him a compliment for his admirable fighting skill, the animal just insulted me. I allowed my anger to flow through me as I prepared to part his head from his shoulders, but the rebel chose instead to take his own life. I stood there, shocked by the man's fortitude, and I could see that little Tiberius once again hiding a smirk. All was silent. I had no idea how I was going to save face in front of the men, until Crassus came to my aid. The man truly was a genius. He stood and proclaimed, "Behold, the greatest warriors take their own lives in fear of Caesar." Crassus had not only saved me from humiliation, but he also boosted me tremendously in the eyes of the men, as well as gave them confidence for the coming battles. I truly do owe much to my friend. I only wish he were here now to see that our plan succeeded. Naruto was moved by Caesar's words. To know that the great general truly did care for his friend is more than a game piece made Naruto understand that, yes, the members of his team were pieces in a game to help him in his mission, but they were still important, and should be cared for and treated with a degree of respect. Speaking of allies, Naruto mumbled to himself, I haven't seen much of Shikamaru lately. In fact, the two of us haven't spoken since he came looking to question me about my strange behavior. Naruto thought of the alliance Caesar forged with Crassus and recognized the similarities between the relationship between himself and Shikamaru. Naruto had the political prowess and the leadership capability, while Shikamaru was the businessman with the strategic mind. I think I'll go pay a surprise visit to my good friend Shikamaru. Naruto stood at the entrance to the Nara clan compound. He'd been greeted by Yoshino, Shikamaru's mother, and been informed that the lazy Chunin would be out momentarily. How should I start this off? I was able to catch him off guard the last time we spoke, but I fear he now knows what to expect of me. Perhaps I should tell him the truth, like I did with Hinata and Ino, and sway him to my side with some sob story. Sigh, I'm just not sure with this one. Naruto's musings were cut short when he heard the door opening and the Nara heir stepped outside. Hey Naruto, my mom said you wanted to see me. Yeah, I was hoping we could talk for a bit. We haven't really seen each other in a while, and I just wanted to check in and make sure we're still okay. Shikamaru understood what the blonde meant. However, he hadn't been avoiding Naruto, it was simply just that Shikamaru had been immersed in studying his family history and the history of ancient Rome. It's okay Naruto, and yeah, we're still good. It's just that, well, I asked my dad about the things I learned from you. I know you trusted me with that information, but I didn't think you'd mind me bringing up the subject with my father. But anyway, after speaking with my dad, by this time the two young ninja had begun to walk the streets. I learned that my family has ties to Rome. We had a famous ancestor named Crassus, who was actually part of this really powerful political machine known as the Triumvirate, right? Shikamaru whipped his head around and stared, wide-eyed, at his blonde friend. How do you know that Naruto? Haha, that's actually why I came looking for you Shikamaru. I didn't exactly tell you everything about my trip to Wave Country. At the time, I wasn't really sure I could trust you with that information. But, I've just read something today that's made me rethink my decision, if you still wish to know. The quiet tone in which Naruto ended his response forged a knot in Shikamaru's stomach. But rather than decline, the young shadow manipulator chose to listen. I would like to know, Naruto. Naruto and Shikamaru sat at an outside table of a bakery. Naruto had chosen such a place because he knew that no one worthwhile would be seated at the establishment, only civilians frequented such a place, while anyone of significant standing had their things home delivered or imported. Both ninjas sat silently, neither one really knowing how to start the conversation. Finally, their waitress came by and, after taking their orders, Naruto spoke up. Shikamaru, when I was in Wave, I discovered things. Things that I had never thought possible. I found out where I come from, and more importantly, who I have the power to be. Shikamaru looked across the table at the blonde he'd graduated the academy with, and yet, he's not the same kid I graduated with. He's become someone completely different. Naruto, since you're going to tell me everything, why not start at the beginning? Tell me about how it all started. Naruto, remembering his decision to trust Shikamaru, opened his mouth and spoke, well, alright. It started when we arrived in Wave and were looking for a place to stay. We'd just found a place when I heard someone shout my name, it was Tazuna. He greeted us and he and I talked for a while, and then he offered to let us stay at his place for the duration of our mission. When we arrived, Tazuna and I went into his study. He had something he wished to speak with me about, and that's where things truly began to open up. Ooh. Naruto walked away from the bakery with a satisfied smile on his face. He'd convinced Shikamaru to side with him, become the Crassus to his Caesar. Naruto now needed to find just one more prominent ally, and he would be able to form his own triumvirate. As Naruto walked through the village he thought of all the different pieces he now had on his side of the board. I've got the Hyuga, as well as Yamanaka, Eris, I've got Konohamaru on my side, and I've now acquired the Nara heir as well. Yes, things are coming together much faster than I'd anticipated, but I've got to be careful, those fools on the council can't get wind of this too early or else all my planning will be for nothing. While Naruto's mind was busy with thoughts of his imperial dream, the blonde himself was left unaware of the shadow that followed close behind until it, literally, ran into him. Looking behind him, Naruto's vision was immediately obscured by a mess of dark, indigo hair. It was Hinata, and she looked as if she'd been crying. Naruto turned his body and wrapped the young kunoichi in a light embrace. Naruto had not seen Hinata in over a month, not since before her rank mission, the one where she was to make her first kill. Hinata, You're back. Are you alright? Instead of a vocal response, Hinata just buries her head further into the blonde's tunic. Deciding to resolve this quickly, I can't have her breaking down every time she takes a life. Naruto scooped the crying Hyuga into a bridal carry, and continued on his path towards his training ground. Once they'd arrived, Naruto set Hinata back on her feet, then, holding her at arm's length, asked a second time, Hinata, are you alright? This time the crying heiress managed to shake her head, no, before once again breaking down into sobs. I don't have time for this, Naruto muttered to himself, before he gripped Hinata's shoulders tightly and spoke with authority. Hinata, you must tell me what's wrong or I cannot help you, and if I can't break you of this state you're in, you will be of no use to me. That last statement managed to get through to her. Hinata couldn't allow herself to become useless to the one person she truly cared for. Bringing up a hand to wipe away any new tears, Hinata lifted her head up to look her Naruto-kun in the eye, and began to relay her mission to him. Flashback. Hinata sat on her knees, her wide eyes staring, unblinkingly, at her trembling hands. 20 feet away from her lay the last of the bandit horde Team 8 had been tasked with getting rid of. Hinata and her squad had arrived at the town of Usagi thinking the mission would just be to get rid of a caravan or two full of bandits. What they discovered when they got there, however, was that an entire encampment had been set up outside the town gate, the only thing keeping the bandits out. Apparently the raiders were keeping the people of Usagi held up behind their own walls, and if any of them tried to leave without having something to offer, they were killed. Team 8 had learned this after they'd hurtled themselves over the wall during the night and met up with the town's leader, a man by the name of Gonzo. The squad of ninja quickly deduced that the bandits would have to be caught by surprise. So, they spent a total of 2 weeks having catapults fashioned out of any wood they could find in town, and then forged cannonballs out of bales of hay. During the third week, the team set up their catapults in the dead of night, then loaded them with the balls of hay before then setting them on fire and raining them down on the raiders' encampment. The siege weapons did their job. The men, what was left of them, were left in disarray, and were unprepared to deal with 4 skilled ninja and a ninja dog. Kurenai, being a Junin, used her superior speed to swiftly cut down numerous bandits at a time. While she was gifted in genjutsu, the red-eyed Kunoichi felt that her expertise was not needed to handle non-ninja of this caliber. As she finishes slitting one's throat, she takes a moment to look over her students. Kiba quickly had Akamaru use the beast-human clone technique, to become a clone of Kiba before they began to tear into surrounding bandits with their fang-over-fang attack. Shino was significantly more subtle with his approach, having swarms of his bugs go around and drain bandits dry of their chakra. If a bandit got too close, only then would the Aburame enter into physical combat and personally dispose of an enemy. Hinata, her Byakugan activated, was delivering strike after strike to the men surrounding her. The young heiress was noticeably clenching her jaw, and tears were spilling from her eyes, as she used her bare hands to end the lives of numerous bandits. Kurenai felt pride at seeing her 2 male students handling their responsibilities like true shinobi. But when her eyes landed on Hinata, the raven-haired beauty felt a twinge of discouragement. Her female student was shedding tears while she was taking the enemy's life. Perhaps Hinata truly is too gentle for this type of work. The Junin's mind was quickly returned to the mission when she had to duck under the sword swing of a bandit, and then plunge her kunai into the mont's stomach. Hinata wanted to throw up, she wanted to drop to her knees and throw up. Never did the young girl think that the process of taking a life could be so haunting. She knew she was crying. Hinata could feel the tears as they streamed from her eyes, but she was determined to work to finish the mission. Through use of her Byakugan, Hinata could see the look her sensei sent her way, and it made the young heiress angry. Something that most people didn't know was that those with a dojutsu could see so clearly that it was impossible to forget something you've seen. So while the rest of her squad would eventually be able to block out this horrible night, Hinata would forever have this event stored in her brain. That was why clans with dojutsu were so stone-faced, because they had spent many sleepless nights remembering the lives they'd taken. The only thing keeping Hinata from crumbling was the thoughts of her Naruto-kun. The promise that he'd be there for her when she'd returned home, so that she had someone to tell her that everything would be okay, and that she wasn't a monster for taking these men's lives. Hinata had struck down the final raider with a two-finger strike between the eyes, effectively blowing the mon's brain to bits inside his own head. When the man sank to his knees, blood seeping from every opening in his head, Hinata backed away a few steps before stumbling over her feet and falling to the ground. No longer able to keep up her strong facade, Hinata began to hurl. The young kunoichi threw up until she had nothing left to give but dry heaves. As she brought up her shaking hands into view, Hinata ignored the approach of her team. Kurenai was the first to speak up. Hinata, it's okay, the mission's over and all the bandits are dead. You did great, I don't think I've ever been more proud of you. The sound of her teacher's voice made Hinata's head to snap up and her angry eyes to bore into Kurenai's. Okay. More importantly, how about you tell me a time you've actually been proud of me, Miss Kurenai, because I certainly can't remember any of them. Hinata had activated her Byakugan at this point, her teeth clenched tightly. Hey, Hinata, calm down. Kurenai-sensei's trying to tell you she's proud of you, why are you snapping at her like that? Isn't this what you always tell us you're trying to do, show people how strong you are? Kiba was cut off. I want Naruto-kun to see, I don't care about the rest of you. Naruto-kun would have held me and made me feel better, not stand off to the side and lie about how proud he was of me. With that, Hinata got up and stalked off back to the village. End flashback. Hinata had finished her story and was on the verge of crying again, but the sound of a shadow clone poofing into existence drew her attention. There, standing in front of her, were two Narutos. One was unsheathing his sword while the other had his eyes trained sternly on her. The clone flipped his blade around and offered the hilt to Hinata. The heiress looked over at the original Naruto with confusion-filled eyes. Take that, Gladius. Hinata. Whatever Naruto was going to say, and do, was cut off by the arrival of an Anbu agent. Tsunade sat in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her face and Jiraiya leaning against the side of her desk, staring at the entourage standing in her office. The first member was a male. He had short, spiky, red hair and mint green eyes. These eyes had black rings around them, like the mask of a raccoon, and the boy also had the kanji for love tattooed on his left temple. The young man, no older than 14, was dressed in a set of burgundy overalls and had a white sash that draped across his chest and wrapped around his waist. The boy had mesh armor covering his wrists, as well as his ankles. Finally, the redhead had a gourd strapped to his back. This was Subaku no Gaara. Standing to his left was a beautiful young girl. She had peach-colored skin, with teal eyes, and sandy blonde hair done up into 4 ponytails. She wore a long-sleeved, purple blouse underneath a gray top, and in a dark blue skirt. Around her waist she wore a sash, tied back in a bow. This was Gaara's older sister, Temari. The third member of the group, standing to Gaara's right, was another young man. He wore a black, baggy, full-body suit with a red and yellow circle on the front. On his head he wore a black hood that covered his head completely, but had triangular tips that made him look like a giant cat. On his back, the boy had a wrapped bundle strapped like Gaara's gourd. The young man also wore purple face paint, and I just found out that he changes it 5 times 0.0. This was Gaara's older brother, Kankuro. The final member of the squad, and by far the tallest, was a man dressed in standard Suna Junin garb. He had 2 distinct, red markings on the right side of his tan face. Over his head he wore a turban, with a white sheet that covered the whole left side of the man's face. This was Baki, the Junin leader of the Suna siblings. I have to say, Tsunade began, I'm surprised by your sudden visit to our village. Especially with recent events causing a dangerous strain in our alliance. The mention of the invasion caused 3 of the 4 ninja to flinch. It was that reed-headed 4th ninja that chose to respond. Lady Tsunade, while it is true that our 2 villages are at odds due to Suna's involvement in Orochimaru's attack, does that mean I'm not allowed to visit someone I consider my friend and brother? Tsunade had not expected such an answer. She'd heard, of course, about the invasion, but nobody had told her any of the technical details, such as who had beaten who. Excuse me, Gaara-san, but if you could tell me who this friend is, then I can have them brought here to greet you. It seems you and I are on the same train of thought, Hokage-sama, because I was going to ask you to call that friend in, but for a completely professional reason. At this, Tsunade's interest was fully piqued. And just what kind of professional business would this be? When she finished, Tsunade noticed the girl, Temari, duck her head and mutter out a non-intelligible response. Can you say that again, Ms. Temari? I didn't quite catch that. The sandy blonde looked up at the female fire shadow and growled out, a political marriage. Tsunade's eyes nearly flew out of their sockets at this news. She was completely unprepared for such a statement. Ahem, excuse me, Jiraiya cut in, reminding everyone that he was in the room, but this friend wouldn't happen to be my student Naruto, would it? His answer came in the form of a sharp nod from Baki. Jiraiya wasn't sure what to make of this. May I ask why the Council of Suna has put forth this proposition? It's not that I find this unusual, from a political standpoint anyway, but why choose Naruto as this girl's husband? Suna has nothing to gain from it. While the overall possibility of a political marriage was the council's idea, the Suna council had nothing to do with the selection. Before Jiraiya could interrupt, Gaara hurried out, I was the one who chose Naruto. While the reasoning was still lost on the Toad Sage, Tsunade was beginning to understand where Gaara was going. While I think I understand why you chose the knucklehead for this assignment, Tsunade began, I'd still like to know why the political marriage is being pushed for. Well, Lady Tsunade, Baki spoke for the first time, it's like this. Flashback. Gaara and his squad stood at the doors of their village's council room. The Suna siblings had been relaxing at home when their sensei Baki arrived, and informed the trio that they were being summoned by the council. After a short walk, the team arrived at the council building, a tall, mud-brown, stone structure. After being signed in by the council secretary, the Suna siblings walked up the stairs, and found themselves waiting to be called in. They were not forced to wait long. With a stern, enter, the team followed behind Baki and stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the council. The Council of Suna was made up of older men and women, most of whom were once ninja who'd fought their entire lives. Those who hadn't been ninja were influential clan leaders. There were no ordinary civilians on the Suna Council. The room was arranged in the typical style. The men and women were seated at tall podiums set up in a large semicircle, ninja on the left, non-ninja on the right. Ah, good, the 3 of you managed to make it, spoke an elderly man dressed in the gold and blue robes of a councilman. Honored elders, while it is a pleasure to see you all alive and busy, what business do you have with our team that required you to pull us from the vacation time that you yourselves scheduled for us? Gaara's greeting was ended with a stern look that told the aged men and women, this had better be important, or else. Gaara had calmed down significantly after his battle with Naruto. He was brought back to Suna, carried by his older sister, and had gotten his seal fixed so that he was allowed to sleep. Something he took full advantage of when left alone. But he still maintained an air of danger, and was quickly angered when he thought someone was wasting his time. Gulp. Well, you see, Gaara-sama, the reason we called your team in today was to discuss the damage done to our alliance with Konoha, and how we may be able to fix it. This lightened the Jinchuriki mood, to the point that his green eyes lost their angry gleam. Gaara had been upset to find that, due to the 2 countries' strained relations, he was unable to visit his fellow Jinchuriki and lone friend, Naruto, unless the redhead was visiting the village on business. That's encouraging to hear, elders, Gaara began, his eyes closing in thought, but how exactly do you intend to accomplish that? The redhead didn't want to get his hopes up too high. Another elder, this time a female, spoke out. Ahem, well, the way we see it, young master, the alliance could be re-solidified through a union between two members of each village. Anything else the old Crow-Mite Avenue said was cut off by a loud, no way, from Temari who, from the beginning, had a bad feeling about the meeting. There's absolutely no way you old goats are bargaining me off to help fix a mistake that you all decided to make. Lady Temari, please, be reasonable, the same old woman began. We're trying to regain the favor of the Fire Daimyo, so that he will return our missions to us. In the short while that our own daimyo began handing missions over to Fire Country, Suna has experienced a dangerous recession. There's not enough money coming in, and our trading business isn't picking up enough of the slack, we just don't have enough valuable resources. Lady Temari, we wouldn't have chosen this option if we had any other choice. Temari understood well how bad things were getting in her home. She was beginning to see businesses closing because no one had money to buy their goods. She in turn noticed those people living on the streets because they didn't make enough money to pay for their housing. Even her family was beginning to struggle, and they were the children of the previous cage. While I understand our plight, Saya-sama, that still doesn't answer the question of why I have to be the scapegoat here. There are plenty of other kunoichi in Suna who could fill the role. While it is true that there are other kunoichis in Suna, you are wrong in assuming that any of them are suited for this task. Temari opened her mouth to retort, but Saya held up a wrinkled hand, and continued speaking. Before you say anything, you truly are the only girl we can offer to Konoha. You are our top kunoichi, your skills are unmatched by any of your female peers, you've even managed to best some of our chunin. And even if skill wasn't a deciding factor, you are the daughter of the former cage. While that already puts you in a lofty standing as a bride, your relation to him serves as a double positive towards our goal. By this time, Temari's eyes had screwed shut in anger and her jaw was clenched in frustration as well. Through grinding teeth she asked, why don't you enlighten me about this double positive effect, Saya-sama? Of course, dear. You see, the first point is as I've already said. You are our most skilled fighter, and the Leaf Village admires and covets strength, just look at the last Uchiha. Now, the second reason is much more political. If we hand over the daughter of the man that helped lay siege to their village, then Konoha will view us as humble and truly regretful of our action. While handing you over may seem cruel, you must look at it from the political point of view, Lady Temari. When Saya had mentioned Sasuke, Temari felt a cold shiver run down her spine. They wouldn't. However, at the same time, she did in fact see the truth behind the elder's words. She really was the only kunoichi Suna could offer up. Knowing this, Temari lowered her head in defeat. Seeing Temari lower her head made Saya grin. She'd convinced the girl that the arranged marriage was the best option. What she neglected to mention, however, was that the Suna Council also had its own agenda in securing this marriage. They'd decided to marry Temari off to Sasuke Uchiha, with the stipulation that Temari be allowed to visit Suna if she so wished. They added this because the elders knew that the sandy blonde would want to have any children she might have, in the safety of her home village. The council would then abduct the child, and create its own army of Sharingan warriors. I'm glad to see that you've come to reason, Lady Temari. While it does sadden me to see our most promising kunoichi leave us, the council will put forth a clause stating that you may visit Suna whenever you wish, so you don't get too homesick. The young girl picked up her head and smiled lightly at the room full of elders. Maybe this won't be so bad then, I can just split my time evenly between here and Konoha. This way I can be here for our holidays and to help Gaara relearn his emotions. Saya-sama, while I'm ready to accept the proposal, you never actually told me who I was marrying. Saya put on her best granny smile, and spoke. Why, I thought it'd be obvious, dear, we're choosing Sasuke Uchiha as your intended. With that statement, the sandy blonde kunoichi's entire world began to crumble. While she had thought Sasuke was attractive upon first meeting him, Temari swiftly lost interest after seeing how he behaved towards his comrades and his arrogant, self-centered attitude. No. All eyes turned to look at the redhead, who'd been silent up until that point. Gaara had agreed with what the elder had said, the proposal was sound. However, what the Jinchuriki could not accept, was the on whom the council had chosen. The redhead may have only just begun to understand the importance of family, but there was no way he was going to allow his sister, the same one who'd been by Gaara's side his entire life, to marry someone as unworthy as Sasuke Uchiha. Excuse me, young master, Saya began, but what do you mean by no? Lady Temari has already agreed with the marriage, so there's really not much you can do. I'm not opposing the idea of the political marriage, I'm saying no to the one you intend to marry her off to. That weakling is not fit to marry my older sister. Gaara's eyes had regained their angry gleam, but Saya would not be deterred. Suna would have the Sharingan. You say young Sasuke is weak, however, I do not recall there being any other genin at his level during the Chunin exams. That boy managed to make you bleed for the first time, if I remember correctly. What genin can say they've done anything even close to that? While it was true that Sasuke had been the first to make Gaara bleed, there was one other who had managed to accomplish a feat even more impressive than that, hand Gaara his first defeat in battle. With the image of the beaten and bloodied blonde in his mind, Gaara smirked. He'd found someone worthy of his sister. Naruto Uzumaki. End flashback. And that is why I have chosen Naruto as the receiver of my sister's hand in marriage. I feel that there is no other ninja in your village qualified for this task. Temari rolled her eyes. Gee, thanks Gaara, I didn't know you considered this whole thing just a task. You know what I mean, Temari. Naruto is the only person I believe is worthy of you, who can truly appreciate you. Temari looked over to her brother, and when she saw the sincere light in his eye, she smiled gently and silently decided try and make the best of the situation. Tsunade watched the interaction between brother and sister, and was reminded of her own relationship with her brother Nawaki, and the one she was currently forging with Naruto. Thinking about that, she came to the conclusion that the political marriage could be good for Naruto. The buxom Hokage snapped her finger, and an Anbu with a bird mask appeared, kneeling on the right side of Tsunade's desk. Hokage-sama, go and bring me Naruto Uzumaki, inform him that envoys from Suna are here to see him, but don't tell him why. Understood, Hokage-sama. And with that, the Anbu disappeared in a cloud of smoke. U0U, Hokage-sama requests your presence, Naruto-san. Naruto and Hinata stared at the sudden appearance of the bird-masked Anbu agent in confusion. May I ask why Bird-san? Naruto asked. He had not been expecting to receive a summons from the Hokage so out of the blue. Representatives from Suna have recently arrived, and they have business that they say involves you. So if you could come with me, we wouldn't want to keep the ambassadors waiting. Naruto nodded in understanding. While the blonde would rather stay and look over Hinata, Naruto knew that to have ambassadors call for you specifically was a big deal. Alright, if it's that important, then we can go in a moment. At this, Naruto turned back to Hinata. Hinata, it seems our time together is being cut short. What I want to do is, Naruto produced another shadow clone, leave these two here with you, and have them pick up where I left off. If that's okay with you. Hinata smiled, happy that she wasn't just being pushed aside. Oh, of course it's okay, Naruto-kun. I understand how important a meeting with Lady Tsunade is. Why you go ahead, I'll be fine here with the clones. Okay, Hinata, if you're sure. After giving the shy Hyuga a smile, Naruto stepped back over to the Anbu member and allowed the man to place his hand on Naruto's shoulder. In a poof of smoke, both were gone. Hinata stared at the spot where Naruto had just been for a few minutes before her attention was snagged by one of the clones clearing his throat. When she turned to address him, she was met with the sight of the clone holding out the hilt of his blade to her. What do you want me to do with that? The Imperator was going to begin your training today. Unfortunately, as you saw, he was drawn away. So, to make up for it, I will oversee your first training session against this other clone. His response was met with a look of surprise. Tea training? Me? I don't understand. What sort of tea training does Naruto-kun want me to start doing? He wishes to begin your formal military training. As I'm sure you already know, the Imperator has already decided that you will serve as a legatus in his army. This will require that you be an exceptional fighter even among the rest of the Legion. Hinata recalled her love mentioning something of the sort when they'd fully discussed his plans for the future, but she'd convinced Naruto that she'd be better off as a medical officer than a warrior on the field. I thought I was to serve as AM medic, to tend to the wounded soldiers. I am aware of that, and you shall, but when battles are over we will have wounded and you will be head of our entire medical corps. You already possess a degree of medical skill, so the Imperator plans to convince the Hokage to take you on as her new apprentice. Hinata couldn't believe her ears. Her apprentice to a Sannin, but that can all be discussed with the Imperator personally later. For now, we will begin work on your formal training. As he finished speaking, the clone C1 tossed his gladius at the young Kunoichi, startling the young girl who clumsily managed to catch it. C1 stepped off to the sidelines, and motioned for the second clone to take position. C2 moved to the center of the training ground, and entered the ready stance. Hinata, not knowing what else to do, walked over and stood across from C2, gladius clutched awkwardly in both hands. Wrong. C1 called out from the sidelines, you will enter into the same stance as the clone that stands before you. The shy heiress nodded and set herself up in the unusual stance. But Hinata couldn't help the feeling that something was just off about the form she'd taken. C1 noticed as well. I see you are having trouble centering yourself in that form. It makes sense, considering you're a Hyuga. His observation confused the brunette. What did being a Hyuga have to do with anything? I don't understand. Why does me being a Hyuga dictate why this stance feels off? Because you are used to fighting with both hands, not just one at a time. While it is true that technically everyone fights using both hands, your specific fighting style known as the gentle fist requires equal use of both hands. C1 used up some of the chakra he was made up of, to create a third clone, who he then had give over its gladius to Hinata as well. Enter into your normal fighting stance, while incorporating the two swords you've been given. Hinata did as she was told, and entered into the traditional gentle fist stance. Hinata positioned her left leg out in front, while her right was set up bent at the knee, so as to be ready to push off and run towards her opponent. Her left arm, like her leg, was stretched out, leveling the blade at C2, and her right arm was bent at a 90-degree angle, its blade also pointing towards the clone. While I've been doing this for the entire month since we've been back, we're going to start you off nice and slow, so as to let you get used to the added weight of the blades. However, this pace is only for today, tomorrow we're going to speed up. With his instructions laid out, C1 nodded towards his fellow clone as a signal to begin. C2 started off with a quick jab, but before Hinata could parry, C2 switched his attack to a horizontal slash that cut through the girl's jacket. Not giving Hinata any time to assess the damage done to her, C2 pressed forward with a strike to the shy Kunoichi's face, snapping the girl's head to the side and leaving her open as C2 performed a sweep slash that left a bleeding gash along Hinata's thigh. The clone finished his maneuver, and stepped back so as to let Hinata regain her senses. Hinata was left completely unprepared for the assault she was just faced with. She'd been fully prepared to parry the clone's first attack, and then press her attack forward, but was caught off guard when C2 suddenly switched his attack to a slash. Thankfully her jacket was heavy and had taken all of the damage, leaving Hinata herself unarmed. However, her jacket couldn't protect her against the follow-up attack, and Hinata was left dazed from a right cross. And just when she thought it was over, Hinata then felt a burning, stinging sensation in her thigh. She'd been cut. When she was no longer being bombarded with painful sensations, Hinata managed to clear the cobwebs from her brain, and take stock of her condition. She noticed that the only serious injury she'd suffered was the wound on her thigh, but she refused to let that be the end of her training. I won't let this get in the way, I'll prove Tat I'm capable of keeping up. The fire that ignited in Hinata's eyes after her self-reinforcement didn't go unnoticed by C2. While he was proud of her, the clone understood that his creator needed to keep his distance from the girl if he were to be able to focus on restoring the empire, so he held back any visual show of praise. Good, you're ready to go again. This time, don't stand quite so tense. Obviously you need to be ready to react to your opponent's movements, but being too tight results in being unable to adapt to quick changes, like what just happened a moment ago. Hinata took this in, played back her first round, and realized the clone's point. Nodding her head in affirmation, Hinata reset herself into her stance, activated her Byakugan, and motioned to C2 to re-engage her. Seeing that the Hyuga heiress was ready for a second round, C2 walked forward, and also re-entered his ready stance. Beginning the round with something new, C2 performed a sweep slash. This time, Hinata managed to avoid the attack, and thanks to her dojutsu, managed to parry the rising slash C2 performed as a follow-up to his sweep. After her parry, Hinata brought her left hand down and attempted to plunge her second blade into the clone's shoulder. She missed, however, because C2 used his leather-braced forearm to knock the attack aside, and then rolled backwards to regain his bearings. When Hinata noticed the clone pulling back, she decided that giving him space was too dangerous, and followed him, letting out a short battle cry as she leapt into the air, spun, and brought both her blades down upon C2. As C2 was rolling, he heard the sound of grass crunching beneath quick steps. The sound of Hinata's battle cry let him know that the kunoichi was indeed pressing her attack. After his final roll, C2 set his feet firmly on the ground and brought up his gladius to block the two incoming blades. With a clang of steel, Hinata was brought down by gravity, and the heiress found herself locked in a stalemate with her blonde love. Due to her minimal physical strength, Hinata soon found herself being pushed back as C2 began to rise from his kneeling position. When he was fully back on his feet, C2 pushed Hinata's blades to the side, and caught her under the chin with a viscous uppercut. The blow sent the young kunoichi flying back, and landed her hard on the ground. C2 sheathed his gladius and waked over to the downed Hyuga. She was clenching her eyes shut in pain and wiping at her bloodied mouth. Never get into a physical standoff with an opponent that is stronger than you, otherwise that will happen again, and your opponent won't stop to make sure you're okay. With that said, C2 stretched his hand out to Hinata, and helped her to her feet. Now, return to your ready stance, and we'll go again. We're going to do this until the Imperator returns. Hinata only gave an exhausted, hi, before doing as she was told. Tsunade, Jiraiya, and the envoy from Suna didn't have to wait long before the Anbu agent returned with Naruto. But they were all shocked to see the figure that stood in front of them. Standing next to the Anbu was a young man with wild, blonde hair that covered his ears and reached the nape of his neck. The blonde had a set of hard, stern, cobalt blue eyes and an annoyed look etched onto his chiseled face. He wore a blood-red tunic that reached to just past his knees, with a thick, leather belt tied around the waist and another leather strap across his torso, sheathed blades held tightly against his hips. The other members of the room could make out slits that ran from the bottom of the tunic to about mid-thigh. The blonde's arms, which had increased in muscle mass due to his excessive training, were situated with his left hand holding his right wrist, and both arms bent slightly inward. Both wrists were adorned with brown, leather bracers. On the young man's feet were a pair of brown, leather boots that reached mid-calf. All in all, the blonde that stood before them was only truly recognizable as Naruto because of the whisker marks on his cheeks, and the ever-present first Hokage's necklace that hung around his strong neck. Apparently they had been staring too long, because the blonde decided to speak up. Are you going to tell me why I've been summoned, Hokage-sama, or am I to be kept waiting while you stare at me? The blonde's tone, as well as his language, were another shock to those who occupied the room. Gaara, being the least shocked, spoke first. I apologize for our staring, Naruto. It's just that, you look so different from when we from Suna, and apparently the Sannin, last saw you. As to why you've been summoned, it has to do with a matter involving the alliance between our two villages. Naruto looked over, and for the first time, realized that one of the occupants in the room was his friend and fellow Jinchuriki, Gaara. Seeing the friendly, familiar face made the blonde's annoyed visage melt away into a welcoming grin. Naruto turned in the redhead's direction and greeted his brother, Gaara. It's good to see you. And I see the dark rings around your eyes have thinned, finally getting some sleep. The sudden change in mood was another stunner to the two Sannin in the room. Was this the new Naruto they'd heard so much about? As a matter of fact, yes, I have. You're actually the first person to notice this. Gaara threw his own annoyed look at his siblings and Junin-sensei before continuing. Unfortunately, pleasantries and catching up will have to wait. I'm here on official business. Naruto just nodded his head and responded, of course, apologies for straying from business, it's just been so long since we've seen each other, and I was caught up in the moment. Nothing to apologize for, Naruto, we can catch up fully after we've concluded business here. I remember hearing that you enjoy ramen, perhaps we can catch up over some if you are of a mind. That sounds doable, but we'll have to make one quick stop first. Naruto, don't you think we should get down to business now? You were just upset that we hadn't begun immediately upon your arrival after all. Tsunade cut him off. The young Uzumaki shot the buxom Hokage a stern glance out of the corner of his eye, before sighing, and saying, yes, I suppose I was. And if it means getting to catch up with my friend quicker, then please, by all means, explain why I'm here and how I'm supposed to help with the fractured alliance between our two villages. Well, Naruto, the Council of Suna has decided that we need to show Konoha how sorry we are for our involvement in Orochimaru's attack. They've come up with a, in my opinion, clever way to go about this, Baki answered. And while that's all well and good, the blonde shot back, irritation creeping into his voice, none of you have told me what any of it has to do with me. Seeing the growing anger form across Naruto's face, Temari decided that she'd step up and tell the Uzumaki boy the news. It has been decided that you, Naruto Uzumaki, will be part of a political marriage involving the daughter of Suna's last cage. Naruto looked to Temari, his eyes holding a calculating stare, and replied, and just why am I the best candidate for this? I hold no influence here, or in any other part of the elemental nations, not yet anyway, so I don't see what good marrying the daughter of a cage off to me will do. You should have chosen someone like Sasuke for tea. No. Gaara cut in, I refuse to marry my sister off to the likes of him. Naruto, the Council of Suna didn't select you for this marriage, I did. I picked you because I needed to know that my sister, who has always been there for me, will be in good hands while she's away from her home. The news that Temari was the girl he was being asked to marry made Naruto's eyes widen in shock. He slowly looked between the beautiful Kunoichi and her brother, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. Temari is the girl. She's the daughter of your village's former cage. Gaara nodded. Yes, Naruto, she is. Her, my brother, and I are the three children of the man who allied himself with Orochimaru. The reason she was selected is because, what better way to show humility and regret for our village's actions, than to hand over our most promising Kunoichi? But, as I've said, I refused to let her be given away to just anybody. I chose you, because I knew she'd be treated properly while in your care. While Naruto was flattered by his red-headed friend's words, the blonde genin wasn't sure what to do with the situation. While he didn't mind the thought of being married to Temari, she was very beautiful and a skilled kunoichi, but he didn't see much value in it other than pleasure. And then Gaara spoke up again. I also have another political reason. You see, I'm the favored candidate to take on the mantle of Kazekage, and when I am elected I'll need a diplomatic liaison to travel back and forth between our two villages. And who better for the job than the daughter of a former Kazekage who's lived in both areas? Now that was a strategic reason. Naruto realized that this was a perfect chance to do some subtle political maneuvering. Well, while I don't mind the idea of marrying your sister, she is quite beautiful, and her skills shown in the Chunin exam were impressive. I'm not sure if I'm worthy of her. The blonde's honeyed words sucked in the entourage from Suna. Temari's cheeks tinted a light pink at hearing such sweet words about her. Most boys just told her she was hot, or something of the sort. Gaara felt a sense of security in his decision to pick Naruto as Temari's suitor. The two Sannin, who had remained mostly silent throughout the entire meeting, watched the blonde teen in front of them with calculating stares. They'd both heard of the new Naruto, and Jiraiya had even witnessed a small sample, but here and now the two were being treated to front row seats to the show. Naruto, Gaara began with a small smile. It's that kind of thing about you that makes me believe that you are the best person to look after my sister while she's here in the Leaf Village. After Gaara finished, Temari stepped over to Naruto, and spoke. Naruto-san, while we don't really know each other, I hope that this political marriage can run smoothly and we can learn to work together to better the relationship between our two villages. The blonde genin lightly gripped Temari's hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed her knuckles before responding. Temari-chan, I hope that we can do more than just make it work. I hope you and I can form a real relationship, and that we can be husband and wife in more than just name, my beautiful Desutorizu, Desert Rose. Naruto's gentlemanly gesture, along with his smooth wordplay, caused the tomboyish Kunoichi's cheeks to turn a light pink color. Never in her whole life had Temari been treated as nicely as she'd been these last few minutes with her fellow blonde. While she managed to keep her stern face, Temari's heart began to speed up at the thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a guy who could handle her. Tsunade decided she'd seen and heard enough about the whole ordeal, so I take it this means you two are going through with the marriage. As I've already said, Naruto spoke out, I'm more than willing to accept. However, this isn't my decision to make, it's Temari-chan's. She's being asked to move away from her home and family, to come live in a new village with a guy she hardly even knows. I'd say her word is the only one that matters. Temari let down her stone-faced facade to send Naruto a little smile. Thank you Naruto-san, that's very mature of you to say. Most other men would have just wanted to get the ceremony over with so they could get my clothes off. It seems you may just be a cut above the typical male. Now the two Sannin were on alert. The two legendary warriors had each spent considerable time with the blonde Uzumaki, and they'd never seen him act so charismatic before. Sure, he had his moments of being a gentleman, and being sincere, but never had he been so deliberate about it. The Naruto that was performing in front of them was someone who, with some polish, could really hope to become Hokage one day. While this made Tsunade happy, it made Jiraiya weary. While normally he'd be happy his student was so suave with the ladies, this was a bit much in the short amount of time since they'd last met up. However, any further speculation was cut off when Tsunade's apprentice, Shizune, entered into the office. Tsunade-sama, excuse my intrusion, but you asked me to inform you when Sasuke Uchiha and Kakashi Hatake were in the final stages of their recovery. The young woman's news was met with silence. Ahem, well, thank you Shizune. I'll be there momentarily, we were just finishing up here. Hokage-sama, Naruto spoke up, would it be alright if I went with you? They are after all my teammate and sensei, and I'd like to know how they're doing, since they were both injured trying to protect me. Naruto's request was met with a silent, but firm, nod. So after Baki laid out the marriage document, and Naruto and Temari signed it, Tsunade prepared to leave with the young genin and her fellow Sannin. Gaara, my friend, I'm afraid we'll have to reschedule our ramen session, I've got some people to see. The redhead in question just sent his fellow Biju holder an understanding nod. It's alright Naruto, you go and do what you need to do. With this contract, there are sure to be other days for ramen. With things settled with the Suna envoy Tsunade, Jiraiya, Naruto, and Shizune all made their way to the hospital, while the Suna siblings made their way to the embassy building. While the usual method of getting around was using the body flicker, or roof hopping, Jiraiya asked if they could walk to the hospital. When Naruto asked why, the Toad Sanin just told him, I have something I'd like to talk with you about. Besides, your friend's been in the hospital for about 2 months, I'm sure you can handle waiting a few minutes before seeing him. While a part of Naruto still considered Sasuke a friend, another part had become wary of the vengeful Uchiha. Ever since the incident in the Forest of Death, when they were attacked by Orochimaru, Sasuke had been acting stranger than usual. Add to that this incident with his brother, and Naruto couldn't help feeling that Sasuke was sitting on the razor's edge emotionally. Alright pervy sage, Naruto spoke up, after walking for 10 minutes, what's this important thing you need to talk with me about? Well Naruto, I've been thinking. With Orochimaru, and now the Akatsuki, taking an interest in you I think we need to step up your training. And while we could continue it here, I feel you'd be safer if we trained outside the village. The blonde in question looked over at the hermit with suspicion, and where exactly would we be going? I'm not too fond of the idea of being far from Konoha right now, I have some projects that need my attention right now. Projects? Well, if they're new jutsu then we can work on them together. Anything else and I think we can work through it. Unfortunately, with what you seem to have planned, I won't be able to bring my projects along. So, explain how this training trip is going to work. Okay. What's going to happen is, we'll travel around the elemental countries, training you in how to control the Kyuubi's chakra, and improving your current skills. Traveling will help us keep you out of the clutches of Orochimaru and the Akatsuki, while allowing you to see the world outside of Konoha. Sounds like a good idea, huh? Jiraiya's explanation had started off as a serious set of directions, but finished like a sales pitch, as if he was trying to sell Naruto on the idea. Before Naruto could respond to the idea, the quartet arrived in front of the hospital. After checking in with the receptionist at the front desk, the group of 4 made their way up the stairs and down a set of hallways to arrive at Sasuke's door. They'd chosen to check on the Uchiha first, due to the fact he'd suffered more severe mental damage, as well as physical damage, than Kakashi. When they arrived at the door, what they saw through the window didn't surprise any of them. Sasuke was sitting up in his bed, his raven black hair disheveled and his gray t-shirt rumpled from laying in bed for so long, his legs were covered by the sheet of the bed. The group could see the Uchiha's muscles had visibly degraded due, again, to his inactivity, but he still held a look of strength. Sitting directly by his bedside, and having seemingly never left according to the receptionist, was Sakura. Her hair had regrown to reaching past her shoulders, after being cut during the Chunin exams, and had the look that it had been recently washed. She wore civilian-style clothing consisting of a cherry red t-shirt, sky blue jeans, and pair of standard ninja sandals. The pink-haired Kunoichi was currently trying to feed Sasuke a plate of sliced apples. Here Sasuke-kun, you need to eat so you can get your strength back. Sasuke just sat there, his eyes staring down at his clenched fists. He hadn't even heard Sakura's offer, his mind was occupied with thoughts of his brother. I didn't even stand a chance. Itachi defeated me like I was nothing, he even caught my Chidori. I thought I'd close the gap at least a little, but it's like I'm still that same weak academy student that froze on that night. I wasn't even a warm-up for him. Sasuke's self-loathing was brought to an end when he heard the door to his room open, and a group of 4 walked in. Sasuke Uchiha, it seems you've recovered enough that I can discharge you. Now this doesn't mean you can start any heavy training right away, that will have to wait a few more weeks. But I am clearing you to do simple exercises to help get you back into shape. When Tsunade finished her diagnoses, she noticed that the bedridden Uchiha had tensed. Is there something about my evaluation you disapprove of, Sasuke? As a matter of fact, yes, there is. How does anyone expect me to regain my family's honor, if I'm being hindered at every turn? His question was answered by Jiraiya. Uchiha, I don't know what you mean by hindered. You have Konoha's top Junin as your sensei, practically your personal mentor from what I've heard from Naruto, and a clan house full of scrolls to help you. What more could you need? Sasuke's answer came swiftly. I could be trained by a Sannin. Sigh. Unfortunately, Sasuke-san, I'm already Naruto's mentor. But Tsunade is free to take on an apprentice. The Toad Sannin was cut off by Naruto. Actually, Jiraiya, I was going to talk with Tsunade-sama about taking on Hinata as her new apprentice. I've noticed that she has a budding skill in medicine, and I was hoping Tsunade would help nurture that bud and show her how to perform medical jutsu. Well, we can discuss the idea of me taking on a new apprentice later, Tsunade began, but first, we're going to go and check on Kakashi. Naruto, you can stay and catch up with Sasuke, and come visit Kakashi when you're done. With those words said, the trio of adults left the room and walked towards the Junin's room. After they left, Naruto turned to address his recently discharged teammate. What he saw surprised him. Sasuke was trembling with anger, his fists were clenched tightly and his jaw was visibly clenched. Sakura also noticed her love's aggravated body language. Hey, Sasuke-kun, are you okay? If this is about the whole apprentice thing, don't worry about it. There's no way Tsunade-sama will choose Hinata over you. You're going to get a Sannin for a teacher. As she spoke, she reached out to touch the young Uchiha's shoulder, but her wrist was caught mid-reach. Sasuke's mind was going a mile a minute. Who do they think they are? Naruto's just some no-name orphan, but he's getting training from Master Jiraiya, and now I hear that the dope is trying to get Tsunade to train that mousy Hyuga. They don't even consider training me, they're just pushing me aside like my ambition doesn't matter. No one but me seems to care about the honor of the Uchiha, a founding clan of Konoha. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard his pink-haired teammate address him. When she reached out to him, Sasuke shot out and caught her hand. Sakura's eyes widened at the actions of her love. When he turned to look at her, she gasped at the sight of his eyes, Sharingan blazing in each. Naruto stepped forward to try and calm the Uchiha down. Sasuke, what's wrong with you? Listen, if it's about the training situation, I'm sure we can. He never got to finish, because Sasuke cut him off. Silence. I'm tired of all the disrespect that this village has shown to my family. You all owe us for even bothering to found this village. Cobalt eyes lost their friendly light, and hardened into the eyes of the wolf. Sasuke, I suggest you calm yourself before you do, or say something you'll regret. I don't know where you got this idea that the village has forgotten your clan's contributions, but it isn't true. The village has handed you everything since the night of the massacre. This proved to be the wrong thing to say, because the young Sharingan wielder redirected his blazing gaze over to Naruto, but unlike Sakura, the young emperor in training didn't flinch, he simply stared back. The two boys entered into a fierce staring contest, but this was no mere game. This stare down was a battle of will. The one who blinked or looked away was submitting, and acknowledging that the other was stronger. Finally, Sakura decided she'd had enough. Hey, you guys, let's all just calm down, okay? Look, it's nothing like that, Sasuke-kun. The village loves you and the Uchiha clan. You said it yourself, they helped found the village, so how could anyone in the village think bad about them? At this time she turned and sent a glare in Naruto's direction, and Naruto. What are you doing trying to provoke Sasuke-kun? Leave him alone. If Naruto heard anything Sakura said, he didn't show it. The blonde continued his stare down with the bedridden Uchiha, and asked, Sasuke, is there something you want from me? Sasuke smirked, his face twisting into a cold humor. Actually yes, you and I never got to have our match. Don't you wanna see which of us is stronger? No, not right now, not as you are. When I beat you, I want you to be at your best, so that there won't be any argument about what would have happened if you weren't crippled. Naruto's refusal just angered Sasuke even more. In his mind, it sounded like Naruto had already decided that Sasuke wasn't worth his time, and that was unacceptable. Don't make it sound like I need to be at full strength to defeat you, Naruto. You may look different, but that doesn't mean you're any stronger than you were back in the academy. You're still the same dope you've always been. As he spoke, Sasuke had moved to sit on the edge of the bed, and then stood on his feet. Sasuke-kun, you shouldn't, Sakura began, but Sasuke interrupted her. Shut up, Sakura. This is between me and the clan less orphan. This fight's been building up for years, and today's the day we settle this. With those words, the two boys made their way towards the roof of the building. Ooh. While this was going on, the trio of adults had made their way to Kakashi's hospital room. When they arrived, they were met with the sight of Konoha's copy ninja sitting up in bed, reading his Ika. Ah, Lady Tsunade, you flatter this commoner with your presence. Can I take this to mean you're discharging me? Don't give me any lines from that perverted book, Kakashi, the Slug Queen began, and yes, I am here to inform you that both you and Sasuke Uchiha are being released today. But I'm going to tell you the same thing I told him. No extensive training, only light workouts to help get you back into shape. I didn't mention this to Sasuke, but this also means that there won't be any out-of-village missions being assigned to your team, until you two are back to normal. I was afraid you'd say that, Hokage-sama. Sasuke won't be happy about this. You should have come to me first, and then had me talk to him. Tsunade lifted one of her elegant eyebrows at this. What do you mean, Kakashi? I just got done talking to Sasuke, and he seemed to be taking it all right. Why do you think we should have left informing him up to you? I say this because you don't know Sasuke like I do, you don't know how his mind works. Sasuke is going to take this as a challenge, like he has to do strenuous training now or he'll fall that much farther behind his brother. Sasuke is very prideful, milady. Jiraiya decided he'd move the topic of discussion over to something he thought was more important. Let's put the little Uchiha's hurt feelings aside for a moment, and talk about Naruto now that we have the moment. This confused Kakashi. Naruto, I don't understand. Did something happen? Is he alright? Oh, it's nothing like that, Kakashi, the Toad Sannin responded. It's just that the kid was acting strange when he came into the office today, looks different too. Strange? Master Jiraiya, what do you mean when you say, strange? As we all know, that boy has always been strange, so you'll have to be more specific than that. But before the Sannin could elaborate, the occupants of the room heard a scream. A scram that sounded like it was coming from the roof. Ooh. As the genins of Team 7 made their way to the roof, Sasuke moved out to the center, while Naruto walked to stand against him, Sakura staying by the door. When he reached the center, Sasuke turned and stared into his teammate's cobalt eyes. Naruto, today is the day. We're going to finally have our match, and see which of us is the strongest. Come then, and let us be done with this. I have better things to do than stand around looking at you all day. With that, Naruto unsheathed his gladius, and entered into his ready stance. When did the dope learn Kenjutsu? Never mind, it doesn't change anything, he's still just the dope. I've had years of training in the Uchiha scrolls, he's had nothing, he is nothing. At the end of his thoughts, Sasuke pulled out a kunai from his holster, and brought it in front of his face in a reverse grip. The two genin stood, eyes unblinking, waiting for the other to make the first move. It was the blonde who decided to strike first. With an animalistic growl, Naruto broke into a run and headed straight for Sasuke. Once he was within range, the blonde struck out with a windmill slash. When Sasuke blocked it, the blonde swiftly retracted his arm, and tried for a horizontal strike to the Uchiha's side. This also missed its mark because Sasuke jumped back to avoid it. When Naruto rushed forward, Sasuke thought it was going to be an easy win, Typical Naruto, attack first and think later. But when he brought his kunai up to block the blonde's sword, Sasuke had to grit his teeth to avoid screaming in pain, and tighten the muscles in his arms so as to keep from dropping his weapon. And before the young Uchiha could even think of a counterattack, he was forced to jump back, so as to avoid being sliced in half. Sasuke thought he'd gain a few moments of reprieve, but he was proven wrong when Naruto pursued him, and sent a jab at his chest. Sasuke barely managed to twist out of the way, and he used his momentum to land a roundhouse kick across Naruto's back. The blonde was unprepared for his teammate's counterattack, and his lack of foresight sent him stumbling forward, where he swiftly regained his senses and threw his arm back in a blind sword sweep. The grunt of pain he heard let him know it was a smart decision. When Sasuke caught Naruto with his kick, he thought it was the beginning of the end. Didn't even last 5 minutes, but when he went to press his attack, he was caught off guard, and suffered a decent slice across his chest. Sasuke's gray t-shirt was rapidly being stained by the blood that seeped from his wound. After jumping back to reset himself, Sasuke looked over to his opponent and scowled when he noticed that Naruto looked untouched, and he wasn't even breathing hard yet. Deciding to kick things into high gear, Sasuke activated his Sharingan. With Sasuke retreating, Naruto got a moment to compose himself, and take stock of the situation. Turning around, Naruto set himself back into his defensive stance, and assessed the damage he'd done. I got lucky. That wound will leave a scar, so it's deep enough that it'll impede his already weakened condition. But, now that he's activated his Sharingan, how well will I fare? With that thought in mind, Naruto chose not to engage, and instead wait for Sasuke to make the first move. He wasn't forced to wait long. Sasuke stood, his two-tomo Sharingan blazing, waiting for Naruto to make the first move. He stood there for a moment, and then when he began to feel the effects of his wound, Sasuke knew he'd have to make the first move. So, going for something elementary, the last Uchiha reached into his pouch and produced a handful of shuriken. Throwing those first as a distraction, Sasuke waited until they were halfway to their target before disappearing from view, and then reappearing at Naruto's unprotected back. When he saw the shuriken flying his way, Naruto knew already what was coming next. So when Sasuke appeared behind him with his kunai raised to attack, Naruto responded by reaching back, trapping Sasuke in a one-armed headlock, and bringing the raven-haired genin over his shoulder, only to hold him there as a meat shield against the coming wave of shuriken. When they hit, a cloud of smoke filled Naruto's vision, and left him blind to the uppercut that sent him sailing back. While Sasuke had been surprised by the headlock, he managed to think fast and perform a substitution, leaving a log to take the damage. After his escape, Sasuke managed to find Naruto in the smoke and land a hit on him. When he saw the blonde land on his back, Sasuke began a series of hand signs. Naruto sat up and wiped the blood from his mouth. Well, it seems this is going to be more fun than I thought. While I expected some kind of a fight, I didn't expect this, haha. The blonde sat up and was met with the sight of his rival finishing a set of fire-style hand signs. A moment later, and Naruto was barraged with a wave of miniature fireballs. Jupiter me. Seeing he was next to a line of drying sheets, Naruto snatched the two closest to him, wrapped them around himself, and rolled through the storm of fire. When he landed on his feet, the blonde quickly shed his makeshift armor, and rushed forward to re-engage Sasuke in close combat. Once he reached him, Naruto started off with a jab. When that was hastily parried, Naruto noticed an opening in Sasuke's side. He delivered an elbow into the Uchiha's ribs. With Sasuke off guard, the blonde pressed his attack, and struck Sasuke's bleeding chest with his fist. As Sasuke sputtered in pain, Naruto decided to finish up. So he locked a hand behind his rival's head, and brought it down to meet his rising knee. A crack resounded through the air. With Naruto finished with his attack, Sasuke fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding face in pain. The Uchiha tightened his entire body trying to brace against the pain he felt. Looking up, Sasuke was met with the sight of his rival looming over him, sword held at his side, and the sun shining behind him. Naruto looked like he was on fire, as if he was glowing with the flames of victory. Something Sasuke would never allow. Pushing past the pain, Sasuke shot like a rocket up towards his blonde teammate, his kunai held once again in a reverse grip and ready to slice into Naruto's unprotected throat. What he thought was going to be the end, turned out to be a trick. Naruto had purposely left himself open, in order to goad Sasuke into attacking, and in that way reveal that the Uchiha coveted his pride over their bond. So when his morally dark teammate attacked, Naruto grabbed the outstretched wrist, twisted it behind Sasuke's back, and brought his gladius to his throat. "It's over, Sasuke, you lose." Even as he spoke those words, Naruto still had to tighten his hold on the struggling Uchiha. Grunt, "No, it's not over, I'm not done yet." "How did you get through my Sharingan? I don't understand." Rock Lee already explained that, remember? He told you that, while your Sharingan may be able to read your opponent's movements, it doesn't do you any good if your body can't keep up. The bottom line is I'm simply faster than you. I'm better than you. Unfortunately, Sasuke couldn't accept this. No, I refuse to accept that. How could you have gotten so much better than me? You're a nobody, you have no clan or secret abilities, how could you be better than me? Tell me how. Sasuke punctuated his frustrations with the twisting of his body, trying to escape from the painful hold Naruto had on him. Naruto laughed in his head. While it was true he didn't have any secret abilities, he did have the secret of the nine-tailed fox. Something he was grateful for when he thought about how much the demon's healing came in handy. But then he thought about how Sasuke called him a nobody, and his face took on a furious look. Removing his blade from Sasuke's throat, Naruto shoved his beaten rival to the ground. "A nobody?" Naruto growled out, "Who are you to call me a nobody? I am a Roman, the blood descendant of the greatest Roman to ever live. I am a member of the Julia, a clan descended from the gods themselves. It's you who is the nobody." At this point Naruto had raised his sword up, and was preparing to bring it down on the floored Sasuke, and I'll make sure you don't ever forget that. But before he could swing his sword, Naruto was momentarily distracted when Sakura shouted out, "Naruto, no!" Sakura had stood by and watched the entire fight unfold. Before they'd even arrived on the roof, the pink-haired Kunoichi tried to persuade Sasuke not to fight in his current condition. But when her pleas fell on deaf ears, Sakura was left with no other choice than to watch. While she didn't fear Sasuke would lose, he could never lose to Naruto. What Sakura was afraid of was Sasuke injuring himself by pushing past his current limit. When the fight started, Sakura relaxed, figuring she was right and that maybe Sasuke wouldn't have to push himself too hard. Sure, Naruto had gotten better, but he was still no match for Sasuke. But then Sasuke got hurt, and the young girl's nerves started to fray again. The cut would surely leave a scar, if the speed of blood loss was anything to go by, and would set Sasuke back further in his recovery. Sakura was relieved when she saw Sasuke activate his Sharingan. Naruto doesn't stand a chance now, and while she was surprised when Sasuke's attack was foiled, Sakura mentally cheered at his use of the replacement technique. She had to hold back a verbal cheer when Sasuke landed his uppercut. The rest of the battle went by in a blur for Sakura, the action happening too fast for Sakura's underdeveloped senses to follow. But then she saw Sasuke attempt to slit Naruto's throat, and she realized that this was no mere spar. Next came the exchange of words, and while Sakura didn't understand what Naruto meant, Roman Julia, she still felt that it didn't give the blonde the right to kill Sasuke. So she screamed. In the brief moment that Naruto paused, the quartet of ninja from Kakashi's room all appeared in puffs of smoke on the roof. When they looked over the scene, all eyes widened in shock. "Naruto," Kakashi spoke up, "what are you doing? Why is Sasuke on the ground and you're standing over him, looking ready to lop his head off?" Instead of answering, Naruto sheathed his gladius, and looked over at Jiraiya. That whole training trip idea, you should probably forget about that because there's no way the council's gonna allow that now. Not when they learn about what happened here. The blonde's dismissal didn't sit well with the copy ninja. Naruto, I asked you a question, and as your superior officer, I expect an answer. When I put on this headband, Kakashi, Naruto finally directed at his sensei, I swore loyalty to my Hokage, not the village, and definitely not to you. Tsunade decided to use that to get answers. Alright then, Genin Uzumaki, would you please tell us what happened here, and why we found you in such a compromising position? As you wish, Hokage-sama. The blonde's formality made Tsunade deflate. She missed her nickname. When you all left, Sasuke challenged me to battle. Naturally, I accepted. What you all entered in on was the aftermath of the Uchiha's defeat, and his inability to accept it. Kakashi decided he didn't like the explanation. Naruto, that's very vague. We're going to have to take statements from all three of you, and if what you say doesn't coincide with what your teammates say, you very well may be suspended. Hearing his possible punishment didn't really faze Naruto. He'd have more time to train, learn, and maneuver during his suspension, starting with the downtrodden Hokage. Well, that's all you're going to say, then I suppose you can send for me when you've all decided my punishment. Until then, I'd like to be left alone, I have things to do. With that, Naruto exited the rooftop, and left the group of 6 to their own devices. Now do you see what I meant by strange, Kakashi? Did that seem anything like the Naruto you took on as a student a year ago? The silver-haired Junin looked over to the Sannin that had spoken and replied, No, Lord Jiraiya, it doesn't. Do we know what brought this on? I've got my spy network in wave right now. According to Kurenai Yuhi, she led a diplomatic mission to the country with Naruto as a member of the team, and ever since then, he's been acting strange. Who were the other members? Kakashi questioned. Maybe we can get some new information from them. It was Shizune who answered. The other 2 members of the squad were Ino Yamanaka and Hinata Hyuga. They were assigned because, at the time, every other genin was currently on a mission or had just reported in from one. Hearing Hinata's name made Kakashi pinch his nose between his thumb and index finger. He, like everyone else with common sense, knew of the Hyuga heiress' feelings for the boy, and so the copy ninja guessed he wouldn't get much of anything out of her. Well, we'll start with Ino, and hopefully get enough information that we can piece this puzzle together, because I'm getting tired of all this mystery. Ino was, at that time, actually in Naruto's apartment cleaning up. While the place wasn't very big, her fellow blonde tended to be messy. And knowing Naruto-kun, he'd prefer to know where these are at all times. Ino muttered out as she set Caesar's military logs neatly in a drawer. After their initial interaction at the training field, Ino had stopped by Naruto's apartment, on his orders, and done chores around the house or just to help Naruto relax after a full day of training. But in spite of this, Ino knew her place with Naruto. She was his body slave and political alliance, she wasn't in the same league as Hinata. While her dominus made it seem like Hinata was just another alliance and slave, Ino could see the underlying tone of warmth in Naruto's otherwise cold, cobalt eyes when he spoke of her and his plans for the young brunette. When she'd asked him why he hadn't been intimate with Hinata, Naruto had told her that, strategically given offerings of affection will help with her training, but Ino could tell that Naruto was trying to convince himself, rather than Ino. Knowing that Hinata already held a special position with Naruto made Ino frown. What does she have that I don't? Well, for starters, she doesn't question my decisions. The extra voice made Ino jump, dropping Naruto's cuirass which she'd been told to polish. Turning, Ino began to yell at the intruder, whoever you are, you better get out of here or else. Her tirade was cut short when she realized who had spoken. Naruto stood in the doorway of his room, arms placed in the same fashion as when he was in the Hokage's office, and his eyes holding a disapproving gleam. Or else what, slave? The tone in which he spoke to her let Ino know that her next words had better be convincing, or she'd suffer for raising her voice to her Dominus. Dominus, I didn't know it was you. I thought you were still instructing Hinata-sama in combat. Please, excuse my outburst. Had I known, her next words were caught in her throat when Naruto seemed to appear inches from her, eyes hard with aggravation. Had you known, you would have kept your thoughts to yourself, is that it? Ino, you need to realize that this isn't some silly game. It's not like back at the academy where all the girls fought for Sasuke's attention by trying to outdo one another. Hinata has skills that are invaluable to my mission, skills that you do not possess. Now, this does not mean you are not important, or will be thrown aside, but you will not make trouble with Hinata or any other girl that comes into this circle, do you understand? Ino was trembling. Never had she seen her master like this, it frightened her. Why yes Dominus, I understand. Please, forgive me, I overstepped. Yes, you did, and because of that you're not going to enjoy the foreseeable future. Ino's only response was a small whimper. Night had fallen in Konoha, and most of the village was either already asleep, or preparing for the journey into dreamland. Most, but not all. Sasuke Uchiha was sitting on the roof of one of his compound's buildings. He sat with his right arm resting on his right knee, his left arm propped behind him holding up his weight, and his left leg stretched out in front of him. He wore his usual khaki shorts and blue, high-collared Uchiha shirt. Currently, the Avenger was playing back the battle he'd had on the hospital rooftop with Naruto. Sasuke was analyzing every aspect of the battle, trying to figure out where he'd lost control. The conclusion he came to wasn't one he favored, he never had control. Naruto had dominated the entire fight. Even when Sasuke managed to catch him off guard, Naruto had turned it into an advantage for him. Then came the ultimate humiliation, when Naruto had tricked him. And I fell for it. My family would be ashamed of me. How can I hope to restore their honor, when I can't even beat the class clown? This is the Orochimaru told us to pick up. He can't be that special if he couldn't even detect us sneaking up on him. Hearing the new voice behind him, Sasuke jumped, and entered into a defensive stance. Standing on the upper edge of the roof were 4 figures, each wearing gray versus neck shirts, black pants, and purple bows around their waists. One was a large male with an orange mohawk, another was a sickly-looking youth with silver hair and a strange bundle on his back. Standing next to him was a tanned youth with his black hair up in a ponytail and 6 arms. And finally, on the far right, stood the only female. She had long, red hair and light brown eyes. The girl wore a skull cap with the rim wrapped in bandages, and held a flute in her hand. Now to Yuya, the silver-haired youth spoke up, don't be brash, he might actually be of some use. After all, have you ever known Orochimaru-sama to take interest in someone that was boring? The girl, to Yuya, turned to the one who answered her and growled out, that was a rhetorical question dumbass, I could care less what Orochimaru needs this chicken shit wimp for. Besides Sakin, you and I both know that blonde kid is more valuable than this loser. Hearing the Tayuya girl allude to Naruto being better than him brought back the anger and frustration that Sasuke had been feeling about their fight earlier that day. Naruto is not better than me, you red-headed bitch. Ha, if he's not better than you, then how come we saw Blondie whoop your sorry on top of that hospital, huh? Sasuke could feel the growl vibrate in his throat as he shot back, he got lucky. If I'd been at full strength, he wouldn't have stood a chance. Funny, the one with 6 arms spoke up, we heard him tell that Cyclops that it was you who challenged him to a fight. All that says about you is that you're stupid and weak, ha ha ha. By this point Sasuke was at the end of his rope. He'd been defeated by his brother again, been defeated by the class clown, and now he was being ridiculed by a group of freaks. This was unacceptable, it was an insult to his family's honor, and Sasuke felt there was only one way to remedy that injury. Blood. Activating his Sharingan, and letting loose an animalistic snarl, Sasuke seemed to disappear as he shot forward towards the quartet. Deciding to start with the foul-mouthed reed head, Sasuke appeared in a crouched position in front of her, and kicked her in the chin, the start of his lion's barrage. When she was at a considerably high altitude, Sasuke rocketed up after her. He got behind her, ready to end her with this one move, but was surprised when, as he went to lock her in a hold, she seemed to vanish. But Sasuke didn't get much time to think on this, because he was soon hit with a drop kick to his stomach, and sent crashing back down onto the roof. Fighting through the pain, Sasuke planted his hands firmly on the tile and flipped himself into a crouched position, his eyes rapidly scanning his surroundings. The young Uchiha's wariness paid off when he managed to catch an axe kick meant to split open his skull. Hoping to regain the upper hand, Sasuke attempted to sweep kick Tayuya's other leg out from under her. He was successful, but the red head merely twisted in midair, placed one palm flat on the roof, and pushing herself away from Sasuke. When she landed, Tayuya was met, like Naruto, with a volley of fireballs. However, unlike Naruto, she simply brought her flute up to her lips, and played a hauntingly beautiful tune. What happened next shocked Sasuke. The fireballs didn't hit Tayuya. Instead, they were stopped by an invisible wall, and quickly extinguished. What just happened? Sasuke's red-haired opponent just laughed, before saying, "Ha ha ha ha, you thought I was kidding when I said you weren't shit, loser. I am Tayuya of the North Gate, a member of Orochimaru's elite personal guard. Do you really think you're a match for me?" The name, Orochimaru, brought back memories of the Chunin exams, of the gift Sasuke had been given, and of the power it granted him. Deciding he'd use that power to shut the red head up and prove his strength, Sasuke called upon the dark chakra that coursed through his pathways, and felt as the black flames spread across his body. This, combined with my Sharingan, will be more than enough to defeat that bitch. Rushing in again, Sasuke started off with a feint, and then spun to deliver a roundhouse kick to the girl's head. While Sasuke felt like he was moving at least, Junin speed Tayuya was still able to follow him with her eyes, and this allowed her to catch the foot that would have given a concussion to a lesser ninja. I'll admit you caught me off guard the first time around. But now that I know how fast you move, it's easy to adjust myself to your inferior speed. It's like I already said, you don't stand a chance against me. And if I'm toying with you without having to use my curse mark, and saying Blondie is better than you, then it's the truth. I'd rather be taking him back to Oto than you're sorry. Hearing this, and hearing that he wasn't the only one with a curse mark, chipped away heavily at Sasuke's pride. And it must have shown on his face, because Tayuya started to laugh. Ha 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 ha, what, did you think you were special? That Orochimaru only gave you curse mark, and that there wasn't anyone else in the elemental nations that could possibly survive it. Let me guess, he told you the whole thing about how all the subjects he gave the mark to died, right? At this, the red-headed Kunoichi couldn't help but rub more salt on Sasuke's wounded pride. The funniest part is, there was someone before you, and before us, who received the curse mark and lived. The stupid snake says the Kunoichi was a failed experiment, but I can see it in his eyes. He wishes he could have kept her, wishes she hadn't realized what a sadistic bastard he was. So you see, you're not special, you're nothing. The whole time the sadistic redhead was giving her speech, Sasuke was trying to wrench his leg free from her iron grip. When she finally let go, Sasuke dropped to his knees, fists pounding into the tile of the roof, and screamed. I can't be nothing, it's just not true. I am a member of the Uchiha clan, one of the oldest and most powerful clans in all of ninja history. I know I'm better than this. Ending his assault on the beaten tile, Sasuke looked up to the Kunoichi who handed him his second defeat that day, and asked, Did Orochimaru make you that strong? Can he make me as strong as you? Yes, we of the Sound Four were personally trained by Orochimaru. And yes, he can make you as strong, likely even stronger, than any of the four of us. Sasuke lowered his head in begrudging submission, then take me to him. Alright. You're going to meet us on the outskirts of your village's borders, and we'll depart for Oto. We aren't going to travel together until then, because it's too risky, so use this time to pack anything you think you'll need, and then head out. After finishing her instructions, Tayuya and the rest of the Sound Four disappeared in clouds of smoke. When they left, Sasuke looked over to a building across the street, and stared at the Uchiha crest painted proudly on the wall. Don't worry, mother, father. Soon I'll get the strength I need to restore the honor of our name. And with that, Sasuke went to pack for his trip.